can unmute you too, Marge, if you need me to. Need me to unmute you? There you go.
Okay. Are we ready to start, Tina?
We are.
All right, this is a call to order. So next we will do approve the agenda and then the consent agenda.
Yeah.
So we need.
I was just gonna make a couple of mentions. If we're having troubles with audio, just let me know. I might have people turn off their video if we're having that issue. That helps a lot. So just let me know if you're having troubles, if we're breaking up or having any issues with that. And then just a reminder that if you want anything off the consent agenda, we need to do that now before we approve the agenda. And I will want to remove the minutes from the consent agenda, as there was some errors that maybe you all caught it too, but I'll pull it off and we can talk about it after.
Okay, so we're back to approving the agenda.
Yep, it looks like Larry.
I move we approve the agenda.
A motion to approve the agenda.
All right,
Okay.
so Larry and then Diana, are you second? Okay.
All in favor?
It's a roll call vote.
Roll call.
Go ahead, Tina.
Okay,
Yes.
Larry,
Aye.
Diane,
Aye.
Pam,
Aye.
and Marge.
Motion carries. Consent agenda.
I move we approve the consent agenda minus the meeting minutes.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Again, any discussion? All in favor?
Larry,
Roll call. Aye.
Diane,
Aye.
Pam,
Aye.
and Marge.
Aye. Consent agenda is approved.
Yep.
So are we going to do the minutes now?
Yeah, we can do the minutes. Tracy pointed out to me just before the meeting that all of the votes show a 4-1 when they should be 4-0 because Marge wasn't in attendance. It should not be a nay vote. It's just a non-vote. So it should be all the 4-1s will be changed to 4-0s.
Anything else on the, Larry?
Except for I lost you again. Hang on. There we go. Yeah, I want to know why we aren't identifying staff and consultant members. Because in here, there's a person identified as staff. That's actually Aaron, who's a consultant. But even though I disagree, I understand the issue around the managers that we're operating as one team. But when we have names associated with staff and consultants and other people presenting, it not only becomes very confusing, but you lose authority and clarity. For example, if you just say staff, it could be Nicole, it could be Bill, it could be Dave, it could be Tina. And so you don't know what the backing is for what's being said by not identifying the people. And I looked at what Edina does. They do the same type of thing we do, but they do identify their staff people in there. That's important for the context of what's being said.
Yeah, I think that's fair. If the board wishes, we can change that to include staff names. I don't have any problems with that.
Do we need a motion for that?
I move we change the meeting minutes so that we reflect the names of everyone except for the managers.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, we have to do a roll call vote again.
Yep, Larry,
Aye.
Diane, sorry,
Aye.
Pam,
I'm ambivalent, so I guess I'll say aye.
and Marge.
Aye.
Okay.
All right, are we, anything else? Can we approve the minutes? Or did we?
No, we'll need a motion to approve the minutes as well,
As amended.
as amended.
Right, thank you.
I move we approve the minutes as amended. This is
Second,
Pam.
anyone?
Second,
All right, roll call vote.
Larry,
aye.
Diane.
Aye.
Pam
Aye.
and Marge.
Aye. Okay, now we're down to, we've approved the consent agenda, so I believe that takes us down to visitor comments. And do we have any visitors?
We do not have any visitors tonight.
Okay. Then to the permit program.
Yep.
And we've got 2027.
Big Sky Islands, and Nicole can lead us off on that.
Sure. This was pulled from the consent agenda because of a variance request. So we just wanted to give the board time to look at that and discuss if needed. But essentially, this is kind of a joint effort between, sounds like Army Corps, and it's on Ramsey County Parks land. They're proposing to construct islands for predominantly bird habitat, and then to cut some wind erosion. And it involves fill in the floodplain, obviously, because they're placing fill in the lake. And they submitted a variance request to providing compensatory storage because the fill, given the location of this project, is not causing an adverse impact to the floodplain, and it doesn't raise water surface elevations. So if anyone has questions about that.
It looks like a really good project.
Yeah,
We'll need a motion to approve it.
well, I have a comment.
Why don't we take the motion and second, and then we'll have
Okay.
this.
Okay,
I have a question too.
Okay.
Well,
Wait,
we need a motion.
I move we approve.
I'll
Is there a
second.
second?
Diane seconds.
Diane, second. All right, discussion.
And Larry, you can start us off.
I have two questions. I also think it's a very good project, but one of the things that I found interesting in there is Army ran their own set of calculations. They checked with Brandon on it. Did we run our computer programs to see how they agreed with what the Army came up with their programs?
Yeah, so the Army Corps submitted a HECRAS model, which is standard for this area of the watershed. And Brandon did review it to ensure that they were reporting their results accurately. But typically permit applicants are always doing their own modeling and design, and they submit for review. So BAR doesn't typically run their own model, but just checks their results and make sure that it makes sense.
Okay.
And Larry, we do have cross sections across the whole river corridor in this area that we can kind of compare and contrast to the modeling that shows up. So in this case, it's an area of what we would call ineffective flow, meaning that you can fill in this area. It's not going to pile up water behind it. So that's why this recommendation for approval is in there.
My other question is, from what I read on here, there isn't any impact. So is there a need for a variance?
Yeah, because it still goes against the regulation of Rule D, which would require compensatory flood storage for any fill placed below the floodplain. So while it doesn't have any impacts on water surface elevations or the floodplain in general, any adverse impacts, it's still technically a variation from the rule.
Okay.
Did someone else have a question?
I do.
Well,
That was one of my questions was there going what Larry just asked. And my other question was, Nicole, you addressed flooding, but you didn't address the ecosystem. And so filling this area of lake, it's not going to negatively affect the ecosystem, but rather improve the ecosystem. Is that correct?
So I talked to Bill about this from our office too. Army Corps and Ramsey County Parks, as I understand, had a team of ecologists and biologists working on the design of this project. So we weren't intimately involved with that, but the whole purpose of the project is touted as creating habitat and improving that area for migratory birds. But I can't really speak to, that's not really my expertise. I don't know, Bill, if you have anything to add.
Right. I think it's a fair statement to say that, this project will create quality habitat, and the area that the islands will be created have very loose sediments. And when we toured that area, we didn't see any substantial aquatic plant growth whatsoever. So in that regard, you're giving away lake bottom, substrate lake bottom area. But in that particular zone, we didn't see anything of high value whatsoever. So I think the upland habitat gain, and then also they're talking about putting in emergent plant shelves around the island. So their goal is to create high quality wet meadow habitat associated with these islands. And I think that would be another benefit as well. And that's a type of habitat that is fairly uncommon in the Pig's Eye system right now. So I think that would be a nice addition.
I should mention too that Pig's Eye is a public water. The DNR is reviewing and permitting this project. So they do look at a lot of those habitat ecosystem impacts as well.
And just a follow up too, I think it's important for us, it's in our plan to consider not only flooding, but the entire ecosystem. So I think from our perspective, we should always care and consider both parts and make sure that they're taken into consideration. And my final question is, I guess, a legal one. Would we by approving this and allowing them to fill without replacing set a precedent that might allow future projects to get approved because of this precedent?
So we've historically approved a number of variance requests in this particular area of the watershed because it doesn't fill here, it doesn't cause adverse impacts. It's not like a landlocked water body, like a lake with homes on it. And the board has approved variance requests within the district as well when it's shown that adjacent structures have adequate freeboard. So there certainly has been a history of approving variance requests like this. It's kind of, that's up for board discussion every time it comes in front of you. And that's kind of, hopefully I'm doing a good job explaining when there's no negative impacts that it might be acceptable to approve such a variance. But so it's not unheard of.
Any other questions? All right, let's take a vote.
Okay.
All in favor?
Larry,
Aye.
Diane,
Aye.
Pam,
I
and Marge.
Aye. Motion carries. Next, we're on to single lot residential permit adjustments. And I think we've been through this at a couple of meetings.
Yeah, I was asked to come back this time with defined outcomes. So I included those for the board's review, and I would be looking for similar board action to approve the adjusted implementation plan, associated conditions, and defined outcomes for the remainder of year 2020. So if there's any comments on that memo, please feel free.
Okay, let's make a motion.
I'll move to approve the implementation plan, the conditions and the defined outcomes as outlined for single lot residential projects triggering a district permit for the remainder of 2020.
All right, very eloquent. Is there a second?
Second. I'll second.
Discussion? Let's vote. Tina?
Larry,
Aye.
Diane,
Aye.
Pam,
I
and Marge.
Aye. Enforcement,
Nicole, thank you for your work on this. This is
Yeah, of course.
a really good staff
There we go.
initiative and just good for the watershed organization, but also for the citizens with the way you've set it up. So I'll be eager to see how the outcomes are at the end of the year.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
enforcement action report. Not much going on there.
Yeah,
Our-
couple incidents, but
But you took care of everything.
yeah, it wasn't fun, but we did have Viet Han from Gallowitz helped write a letter to one of the permit applicants that was struggling to meet their requirements, shall I say. But yeah, we had two kind of incidents of really poor water management and dewatering this month. So something definitely we're going to keep on people about. They can't just pond water and expect it to not fill up and discharge in a way that's uncontrolled. So yeah, but the last time, particularly for the North St. Paul project, our inspector Mary went out there this week. The site's back in compliance, so there's not any impacts to the creek at this time. But yeah, stay on them for sure.
Okay, and we don't need a motion to approve, so we're gonna move on. Stewardship grant programs, that was covered in the consent agenda. That brings us to budget status update. Tina, do you want to talk about that?
I got a comment first.
Larry
Oh,
has a-
I'm sorry, Larry.
Yeah, that's okay. On the stewardship grant program budget, I would like to see, and I know, Paige, every time we have a meeting, we add something to your chart, but at least we're reading it. I'd like to see a line at the bottom that says pending grants. In other words, when we have the meeting, there are grants in there and they're not reflected in this table. But just like my bank statement, even though, you know, I make a deposit, it's not available to me. I would like to see a line in there that says pending, which is the ones that are in the agenda. So we can take a look at what the bottom line is going to be the next meeting and make sure we have enough money in the budget, which is my other question. Do we have enough money in the budget right now to be able to do the projects that may come up? Because again, we've talked about the fact this is a wet year. There are a lot of people doing things or staying at home. It's a good program. Do we need more money in there?
Oh, we cannot hear you, Paige.
Larry, are you asking for more money to be allocated to this particular item?
In maybe, it depends on what Paige says.
Well, because we couldn't hear her, I thought I'd just interject
Yes.
that comment.
Because my calculation shows we have $80,600 left after tonight.
Yeah, and so, oh, can we hear you now? Barely.
Tina, why don't you just talk to this?
So I think what Paige would say is we are going to be close this year, right? You can shake yes or no if if I'm not. You know, we are running up and along that border. In the past, we have had years where the board has allocated more funds towards the budget. We do have carryover in that fund. So if you look like at the budget status report, we have money left over from last year. So there is a little more room in the actual fund balance to allocate. It's just in our what we budgeted for this year, we're going to be bumping up against. So there would be opportunities to allocate some of that carryover from the year before to help fund that for the rest of the year. Typically, you know, Paige, again, shake your head if I'm wrong, but I don't anticipate big projects being presented. There'll be the smaller residential ones, so that money gets eaten up slower. But I think we could continue to take it month by month, and if we do run up against a zero balance on that, we could ask you to allocate some of that carryover for those projects.
I just didn't want to get in the position again where we're having to turn down projects.
Yeah, yeah, and
I agree with Larry in that I think that this is an odd year, and I really liked him bringing up that there are a lot of people at home with time on their hands, and this might be an opportunity to really ramp things up this year where we might not in other years.
yeah, yep. I don't know that you need to make a motion or decision tonight. We'll take the direction that we won't turn people away, that we'll continue to be working with them. And if we find ourselves in a situation, we'll bring it to the board for approval at the next meeting.
Okay, good.
Yep. Is that okay, Larry?
Yep, that's fine.
Pam? Okay, she
Yep,
agrees,
yep.
I guess. Okay. So are we back to the budget status update?
Yes,
Or
I
are
just
we
want
done?
to announce that Cliff is here too.
Yep, hi.
Okay.
I think she's done. Is there anything else you wanted to say, Paige?
Are we up to the presentation? Cliff, you got here just in time for the presentations, it looks like.
Great.
Yep. Yes, we are on action item 7A, which I will have Brad lead us off.
Oh, and before we start, when we get done with these presentations, are we going to have from our engineering consultants recommendations, which I would really like to see?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
All right, the next thing on the agenda is the consideration of the Phelan outlet and killer weir modification project. This is one of the key features that came out of the Beltline resiliency study. Modifications to this, these three structures would allow us to add more what we would call resiliency in the system. Basically enable us through development of an operating plan that goes with it, open up gates in each of these structures to allow more water out as it's passing through. This does not draw down the system ahead of a storm, but it tries to match the flows as they're building up to get them out of the system more quickly. The design, if you had a chance to look at it, it did come as a separate mailing. It wasn't in the board packet mailing, but Tina, I believe it came out either late Friday afternoon or Monday morning.
Yeah, it came out on Monday and also was placed on our website at that time.
Okay. So hopefully if you had a chance to look at it, but if not, and you're familiar with the Keller channel structure, it has 3 openings in it. Currently it has concrete weirs that control the elevation of the upper chain. So that's Keller, Jarvis, and Coleman. What this particular modification would entail is a valve system on each of those bays underneath that, within that structure, that would allow us to mechanically open that up, basically from the district office or possibly from a smart tablet, in accordance with the operating plan to let water out depending on how water levels are building up upstream. So that's part of the modification. And then there's 2 outlet structures on Lake Phelan that both lead to the Beltline. And each of those structures are going to be modified with 2 36-inch pipes coming in on each side of those structures with a valve system on each of those pipes to operate in the same way in conjunction with an operating plan. So hopefully if you had a chance to look at the design sheets, you could see what I'm talking about in that particular design modification. So these are what we would consider about 90% complete plans. This is how we usually bring projects like this to the board to make sure we are still on track. This is far enough along where we can develop a good cost estimate. And this is where we would ask for board consideration of finalizing the plans, developing the bid documents, advertising this project for bid. Earlier in the summer, I anticipated that this would be ready for the September meeting. but the team knew that the board was very eager to see this, to get it out for bid sooner rather than later. So hence they had to mail it out a day or two after the board packet came out, but thought you would still like to see it at this meeting rather than waiting a month for the next meeting. So just in summary, with respect to the cost, the engineer's estimate of probable construction cost is $985,000 for the modification. The observation and construction and contract administration is $125,000. We put at this level, we put about a 20% contingency on that, so that's $197,000 for a total project budget estimate of $1,307,000.
And we got enough money to cover that?
We do, yep, in the
Okay.
flood risk reduction fund, yep.
And Brad, how long have we been talking about this project? How many years?
Well, you know, this started to emerge through the Beltline Resiliency Study, which we worked on for about 1.5 years. That was complete essentially last fall. And so if you go 1.5 years back before that, you know, is when we started, you know, analyzing the system. So it's at least been 2 to 2.5 years since we started talking about, you know, this method of trying to add more resiliency in the system.
Okay, we need a motion to approve.
I have a question. So I'll move approval, then we can, if there's a
Then
second.
we need a second.
I'll second.
Okay, discussion.
Question,
And-
yeah. So Brad, could you just explain briefly how each of these, both the outlet and the channel structure actually operates? It's a little confusing with the drawings. I assume they're kind of vertical gates that
They're
kind of
vertical.
drop down and raise up.
Yes.
Is it?
They're vertical gates that do exactly that in all, so in the 3 bays in the Keller channel control structure, and in each of the manholes where the pipe goes into the side of the Phelan outlet structures, they all have similar type gates that will be operated, again, you know, remotely and in accordance with an operating plan that we put together. And that as those drop down, of course, then more water can get out before it actually has to build up head to get out of the system. So yes, they're all basically vertical gates.
And under the water pressure that builds up, they still operate smoothly? I mean,
They
it's the
do.
design.
They do. These are systems that are commonly used in wastewater treatment systems with, you know, at least as much head on them. We've been working with an outside vendor who also has the electronics figured out for this whole system, and they will provide the necessary training to the district staff, to Dave, to others who will be possibly operating this system.
Okay.
I have a question too.
Yep.
And a comment. So my comment is, I think now that we're doing this virtually, Brad and others, I would encourage you when you're, you know, I've got my sheet open and I'm looking, but it'll be even easier for me to follow along if you shared your screen and kind of pointed along what you're talking about.
Okay.
And second, I just want to make assured that if the internet goes out and this is, you know, is there can somebody go out there and manually close them if they're open, or if something, you know, if they're broken, you know, it could be a tragedy if they got stuck open.
Yes.
There's a plan for that?
Yes, there is. There is. There's a manual operation basically as a backup.
Okay. To clarify, Marge, my motion is to approve the preliminary design, estimated costs, and proposed project schedule, and to direct the staff to finalize the design and bidding documents and solicit bid proposals.
Great. And we have a second?
Yep, we
I had
did.
a question.
Go ahead, Dan.
Brad, you said that you weren't going to draw down in advance of a storm. You would just match the flows as it comes. Is that assuming a starting point, or are we going to talk about operations later, or
Talk about operations later. I know as Brandon and Lulu kind of worked through the modeling, through the resiliency study, they showed different scenarios where this would be effective. in doing that. And so now we need to define that more specifically in a written operating plan. And my intention is, once we get bids for this and we basically start entering into preparations for construction, making sure we have all the permits, in parallel, we'll be developing that operating plan. And I'd like to bring that back to the board and, kind of hopefully have some visual representations of, how this will actually work, or scenarios, how this will open up. But again, we want to be clear that this doesn't essentially draw down Lake Phalen 6 inches to a foot and then let it fill back up. This is to really time the flows as they're coming through, so we can get rid of them faster, allow for more water to come in, so we don't have as high of a flood level, but it doesn't get us into the same permitting issues that as we lowered the West Badness Lake outlet system, where there was a lot of concerns about changes in the shoreline.
Thanks.
Any other questions, comments before we vote? Okay, Tina.
All right, Larry,
Aye.
Diane,
Aye.
Pam,
Aye.
Cliff,
Aye.
and Marge.
Aye. So motion carries. Next, we're going to, flood risk reduction and conveyance feasibility studies. So I would guess that's Brad again.
Well, I'll kick it off. Yes, I'll kick it off here, but we do have others here from BAR who were critical in putting together elements of these studies. Sam Rediger is here, all dressed up in a nice suit coat and ready to present. I think many of you have met Sam before. He was integral to a lot of the Beltline repair work. So he spent a lot of time down in the tunnel, and that's why he likes to get cleaned up for situations like this, because he can't wear his coat in the tunnel. And then Matt Metzger is here as well. I think a number of you have met Matt. He has worked on Aldrich Arena, the work with the county over just south of Lake Owasso, done some other projects for the district over the years, and is also, both Sam and Matt have worked on primarily at the Owasso Basin bypass pipeline feasibility study. And as you'll see here in a few minutes, there's a lot of effort that went into that and looking at different alternatives on how to reduce flood risk in that area. And of course, Erin Anderson-Wenz is here. She has worked on the Willow Creek and Willow Lake area study, knows the details of all 4 of these areas quite well through the resiliency work. So she'll help us understand kind of what we looked at over on the Willow Creek system. So I'm going to ask now, Sam, if you have the story map up. Maybe Tina, you could give control to Sam on that. And
Yep, Sam should be able to share his screen. Do you see that option, Sam?
How long is this going to take, Brad? Should we let everybody get a cup of coffee while you get set up?
Yeah, that would be good. That would be good.
Why don't we do that?
Intended to be the workshop, last Thursday, and so.
Yeah, take a minute just to get everything going.
Okay, we'll do that. And let me know when everybody's back and ready to roll. So Sam, what I'm going to start with is, I'd like to just go into each of the 4 areas, and we'll start with the Owasso area and kind of, if you could zoom in a bit on that.
Everybody see the shared screen now? Yeah. Can anybody see the shared screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And again, since I can't see everybody any longer, let me know when you're ready to go, Marge, if everybody's back and beverage in hand. Not making any judgments on what beverage you have. So
Cliff is back. Marge isn't quite back yet.
Brad, we'll go from you to me to Sam.
okay. So Sam, you still have control, right?
Yep.
Okay. I'm gonna zoom back in on that Owasso. You had it perfect before with the cloud there, right about there. That should be good. That should show up there. Yep.
I have a question, Brad.
Yep.
Will this be available for us to look at on the website?
It will. Yes. Yeah.
And is there a report to go with it?
Not yet. We're going to talk about that because a key piece of this is guiding, having an understanding of each of these elements to help us guide how you would like to see the report finalized. Because I'll wait until Marge gets back, but that was part of kind of my overview of this.
Oh, I'm here. I just
Okay.
wasn't sitting down.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Is everybody else, again, I can't see everybody's picture anymore.
Yeah, I think everybody is okay.
So what we're going to do, we're using the story map, and you've seen this story map in different forms as the Beltline Resiliency Study has evolved over the past couple of years. And so we're going to use this to look at details of what each of the feasibility study areas entailed, so you can get a better handle on how we looked at, basically reducing flood risk in each of these areas. A key piece of what we want to achieve tonight is having each of the managers be familiar with the story map and how to look into it further, because as I said, Larry, we're going to post this out to the district website. And so you can operate it and look at it and make sure you're comfortable with how we arrived at the recommendations we're going to give tonight. But also, I think it's key, especially in the Owasso area, depending on how the board guides us either tonight or shortly thereafter, after they spend more time with the story map, that will guide how we write the technical memorandum. And because these are such large scale projects, we hate to go down a path that if the district is not interested in taking on that size of a project or committing those that amount of resources, the report can be framed up in a slightly different manner. And so we'd like first to be able to hit each of the areas. And what you're looking at now that's kind of clouded out, you can see the area up by Owasso Basin with many of the structures in North Star Estates and the businesses around the area. It goes down Jarvis Creek all the way through Jarvis Mill Pond to Jarvis Lake. So that's really the first study we're going to talk about that Matt Metzger and Sam Redinger will give you the details about. Now, Sam, if you go over to the Willow Creek system, basically move straight east.
Can you see that?
Over there, keep scrolling
over
over.
there.
There we go.
Here we are.
And so you can see where that cloud is around the 61. You can point to that, Sam. And the wetland area upstream of that shows a number of red structures that again signifies homes or businesses that are currently in the floodplain based on the modeling we did from Atlas 14. So Aaron will talk about this area after Sam and Matt get done. But that system again drains first to the west and then to the south into Coleman Basin. So if you could scroll straight south to the south end of Lake Phelan, Sam.
You want to go all the way to Lake Phelan?
Like south end of Lake Phelan. Yeah. And so
Got it.
what we just looked at, we're in the upper portions of the Phelan chain, but another area that was mentioned in the status report is the Ames Lake area. This also was identified in the Beltline Resiliency Study as an area that needed attention. So we'll talk a little bit about that near the end of the presentation, but just know that that's kind of the orientation when we say Ames Lake, it's to the south of Lake Phelan. And then the fourth component of the study that I will just briefly hit on at the end of all of our discussions is the Coleman Creek system. And so if you go back up to Coleman Basin and go straight east of Coleman Basin or Coleman Lake.
Over here.
This was not part of our scope for this work, but we do have a lot of information in the resiliency study that identified areas along Coleman Creek. And again, this is Markham Pond. This is the PCU Pond, or formerly known as Target Pond, North St. Paul Urban Ecology Center. All of these areas have flooding issues along them. But what we're trying to do is give you a sense of what would it take to address many of these flooding concerns. And so that's the order of how we're going to go through things this evening. And we want you to be familiar with kind of where these are in the district, how to navigate the story map, and then help us, and the end of this, help our team from BAR and the district staff, guide us kind of in particular in one direction or another when it comes to the Owasso work, because depending on the direction that the Owasso area takes, it will help inform many of these other elements that we'll be talking about on the other side of the district. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to first Matt Metzger, who has been one of the leads on the Owasso study, and let Matt kind of explain the alternatives they looked at and how we arrived at a recommendation.
Thank you, Brad. Sam, you want to go to our landing page there? Thanks for inviting Sam and I in to present on this tonight. We've had a team working on this this spring and this summer. We're excited to share with you what we've learned. This effort builds on the 2018 and 2019 resiliency work. We would consider that study to be conceptual pre-feasibility, and this study would, the level of detail would be a feasibility study. To craft an alternatives assessment like this related to flood risk reduction, our BAR team, we source ideas from our various team members across BAR. I mean, we have worked on similar flood risk alternatives assessment projects across the upper Midwest, ranging from $1 million up to $800 million, and blending buyout projects, as well as structural features and complicated multi-year phasing projects. So we use that background to identify key study components and key considerations that show up in all of those studies, regardless of whether they're small or large studies. And that builds on input we've received in the past from Corps of Engineers, FEMA, cities and counties, and the DNR. So that's where we're coming from with how we put this study together. And where we start with an effort like this is we have to get a sense for the magnitude of the problem to be solved. So in the case of Owasso Basin, the magnitude of the problem is about 103 properties that are at risk of severe 100-year precipitation flooding, inundation following a rainfall event of that magnitude. And, and that's a big number. And what we've crafted for paths forward and things for the managers and the district to think about is, if you were to decide to proceed, what should you consider, and what's the pros and cons of each of these options? What would be the right optimized blend of features to take into a detailed design effort? How does the potential scale of the investment compare to what the district has available for resources, and what are other possible financial resources to fund a project like this? But our intent here is that in the next 20 minutes, we'll help set the stage for you to think about how to make decisions about what your path forward is. And as you're listening to Sam walk through the tabs of the story map, be thinking about in the back of your mind, for the residents and the businesses in this part of the district, what's that right blend of existing emergency measures, maybe improved emergency measures, buyouts of potentially the lowest properties that are most at risk of more frequent inundation, and then possibly a construction project to help lower flood stages and get more of those folks and businesses out of those 100-year inundation areas. So, and as you think about that, please factor in the resiliency aspect of this part of the basin or this part of the district. It's different than some other flood projects we've looked at in the past because this isn't really a riverine flooding system. This is most at risk from severe rainfall coming out of the sky unpredictably. So your preparation time and your response time are very, very shortened as far as when that event happens, and it's a short amount of time between that rain falls out of the sky and the properties begin to flood. So we'd ask that you kind of think about that as we walk through these options as well. And then we'd like your feedback later on about what you see as potential paths forward. Like, so as Brad stated, we can craft a report that aims the district in the direction the district wants to go. So Sam, with that, I will hand it over to you to walk through the options that we've identified so far.
Okay, thank you, Matt. That was well said. And Brad, thank you for that introduction. And in regards to my suit coat, you dressed for success, and you look good, you feel good. So, but yeah, just to reiterate that, happy to be here to talk about this. It's a pleasure seeing everyone, albeit virtually. I have met many of you on the call here before, so happy to see you again. And yeah, like Matt kind of introduced the scope of the feasibility study, we approached it, we had that question of how do we help that high volume of homes within that inundation extent, and how do we help remove them from that inundation? And since the area of the Owasso Basin and the surrounding and the Jarvis Creek extent down to the mill pond and the lake, it's very big, and depending on the infrastructure going in, the magnitude of possible alternatives kind of varies on how you integrate and create synergy between the different sections of the Owasso Basin. So we subdivided the scope into kind of 4 different sub-projects, and they're highlighted here in this bottom bullet. So you'll be seeing familiar taglines for the sub-projects. We're referring to them as Owasso Basin, the bypass pipeline, Jarvis Creek, and property or buyout acquisition. So scrolling down here, we have a preliminary summary table to help give a quick overview before we dive into the individual story map. There's 4 sub-projects of the feasibility study, and Owasso Basin, bypass pipeline, property or buyout, property or land acquisition, and then Jarvis Creek. What we found is that Jarvis Creek and aspects of the Jarvis Creek sub-project needs to be included in sub-project 1 and 2, given its importance of conveying water from Owasso Basin down to the mill pond and the condition it's currently in. Further, within the sub-project of Owasso Basin and the bypass pipeline, we took a closer look at individual concepts and alternatives of structuring those sub-projects. So they're further broken down into sub-projects 1A, 1B, 2A, and 2B.
The sub-projects that Sam has on the screen there, the various ways to try to solve this issue of flooding for the 103 properties. Generally, you're trying to intercept flow before it gets into Owasso Basin and route it south and out of the system. That would be the bypass pipeline options that Sam has shown there. The Owasso Basin options involve lowering flood stage by creating storage, combating flood stage by building berms and levees, and potentially buying out or offering voluntary buyouts to the lowest properties that don't benefit from any of those measures. So that's what's shown on the screen here. And what Sam has at the bottom in that green bar, detailed design optimized scenario. At the end, when we talk about recommendations and how to go forward, if the approach is to continue to look at a project that would involve buyouts and constructed features, it would involve some optimized blend of pieces of what's included in those projects above. So as Sam goes through the individual projects, we're not necessarily saying we have to choose option 1A, 1B, 2A, or 2B. What we're saying is there's beneficial pieces to each one, and we would, during detailed design, dig into what's the right blend of those pieces.
I have a quick question. This is Pam.
Yeah, go ahead, Pam.
So do you have, so we, 2.8 feet, 1.8 feet to 1.1, do these things, are you going to tell us how cumulative, I mean, certainly if we did one, it's going to affect the other upstream areas. And are you going to tie this all together for us? Because it's not clear to me how this would be, it would be additive, or do you understand what I'm asking?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely going to be some, synergy between other infrastructure shortcomings that are upstream of Owasso Basin, for sure. The intent of this 2.8 foot value here, Pam, is to communicate the local storage benefit that this sub-project would provide and what the 100-year inundation footprint is reduced by. And so that corresponds to typically a higher volume of houses or properties or structures being removed from that floodplain.
Sam said you're going to walk through each of these, right? So she can see what that looks like.
Yes, yes.
My question is really, what I don't understand from this, and I'm hoping to grasp by the end, is are these cumulative, or if each one individually would do this, and how, I'm having a hard time wrapping my mind around that.
No, that's a good question, Pam, and happy to provide some clarity. So what you're seeing across each row are the individual attributes or characteristics of this sub-project if it was constructed by itself without consideration of 1B, 2A, or 2B. And there's more. This is a kind of a sneak peek of a bigger table that we'll get to near the end of the presentation. We've constructed story maps with the slider bar to help you understand the magnitude or impact of these sub-projects. And we'll get into what the features are of each of those on an individual sub-project basis. And
They're not necessarily additive, but there are pieces of them that would be, depending on which major features drove the path forward. There are complementary features in the other sub-projects, so they're not, but they are not necessarily additive altogether, no.
You wouldn't do all of those sub-projects in order to solve all the problems. These are different approaches to solve different levels of the problem. It'll be clear with the slider bars too, but they're not additive.
mm-hmm.
Let's proceed so we can get through that.
Okay.
See what we're dealing with, yeah.
For sure. So first, sub-project 1A, I'll go to that story map page. So this should be familiar to everyone. There is the slider bar. As you slide it across the screen, you'll see red. The red are representing structures at risk within the 100-year inundation footprint. So we'll go through that. On the left side here, you see kind of a summary tab, which is intended to outline the highlights as the managers kind of work through the story map and refamiliarize or get more familiar with these individual sub-projects. Later, once this is posted live, you will have this off to the side to kind of guide your understanding of each of these sub-projects. Features, benefits, some risks regarding that specific sub-project, and then it will, a couple bullets on cost here. So starting over on the far right with the slider bar, kind of moving it across. One thing that may be different with this is as the slider bar moves, you start to see some line work pop up on your screen. What that line work is representing are the individual components of this sub-project. I think, as I mentioned, Jarvis Creek is a critical element of the Owasso Basin itself in that it's its primary conveyance route downstream to the mill pond in Lake Jarvis. Currently, the hydraulic capacity of this creek is not optimal. It's got some sediment in it, kind of creating some high spots. It's got undersized downstream structures at road crossings. So elements of modifying Jarvis Creek or addressing some hydraulic concerns in that are included in each of these sub-projects. The magnitude of that Jarvis Creek modification is dependent on what that upstream modification does, both locally and routing that flow into and through the system. So zooming in a little bit here on Owasso Basin Subproject 1A to describe what you're seeing here on the screen. And when you do come back and look at this, there is a legend down here, which will help give some context for the different shapes and colors you're seeing. So Owasso Basin, North Star Estates, Fredor, subsidiary of Fratellone Companies. There's a commercial district here on the west side of Owasso Basin, and then an industrial park further to the west.
Yeah.
So moving from left to right, surface runoff from this industrial park here on the left does generate a high peak flow during the 100-year event. So rather than routing that flow through an Owasso Basin and contributing to a problem area, we're looking at getting that flow and directing it into Jarvis Creek at a point downstream of Owasso Boulevard. So the scope built into this element of Owasso Basin is a diversion berm with a kind of a low flow pipe and then a higher flow pipe on the south side to direct that surface runoff into Jarvis Creek. We took a look at the Owasso Basin footprint and the pond contours upstream and downstream and surrounding elevations to understand where our control points were in regards to the maximum level that Owasso Basin can reach. Understanding that helped us develop ways to both improve conveyance into and through Owasso Basin and out, where our low areas were and how to beef those up, make them bigger to retain more water, and expanding the basin footprint itself to the extent feasible. There's two big components of the Owasso Basin scope that are the key contributors to providing a lot of benefit. The first one is a 4-foot tall berm on the west and north side of North Star Estates. This is a 4-foot tall berm with a pretty wide footprint. And the reason it's shown encroaching into the North Star Estate area is because we didn't want to extend into Owasso Basin itself, further reducing or taking away storage capacity. That's a really big element of the scope. If we move this slider bar, there's a lot of homes there in that berm footprint. And in order to construct that berm, these people would need to be temporarily relocated with their home moved, utilities, risers, extensions or risers put on a lot of the in-place utilities, the area filled in, and then the homes put back in place.
How feasible is that really?
That's a very good question, and it's a question we have been asking ourselves. It's a concept that yields a very large magnitude of benefit, and so it's worth considering, and it's a big reason we kept it part of our kind of concept design.
No, you're right. I agree that the concept is wonderful. If you could, I mean, that's a large number of homes that you could save in people's lives that could be affected. I just don't know how you would, who you would work with and how that would work as far as being feasible.
Correct.
To move the homes and move them back, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
What?
I think so.
I don't even know if those homes are able to be moved, some of them.
Yeah, most of them are.
Oh, are they?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know that much about those structures, so that's why if I'm asking silly questions, it's just that
They're mobile homes, means they're mobile. You just get the wheels reset and you just haul them away. But I think it's going to be difficult to stage them somewhere, get the people to relocate for a period of time, and then move them back. So I'm not
Mhm.
quite sure in terms of a process how it will.
Well, I don't know either.
Yeah, the alternative would be to push your filling into those blue areas. But you probably would still have some grading. You'd probably still have some interruption grading and filling on the individual properties. So you'd have to engage the owners and the North Star Estates ownership in a conversation about
Right.
what's doable.
Maybe more feasible just to relocate the homes and not move them back. That's always a possibility.
Or perhaps we buy the land, fix it, and then sell it back once it's fixed.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good idea. I have no idea what that would cost, however.
No, good dialogue. And Pam, there's no such thing as a silly question. As an engineering professional presenting a technical topic, when we hear questions, it just reinforces that we have an interested audience. And so that's always a pleasure to have. So
And you know more than we do.
we try, but I'm not going to say we do.
I would say, Pam and Cliff and others, as Sam's goes through the, estimated costs, at least at this level, associated with projects of this type, we also recognize that, these are high buck, high level of effort projects. These are not something you do next year.
No.
And so it would take a lot of coordination. It would take a lot of staging. It is something that could be done. And it's, again, why we kind of frame that up. As you start to look on the left side, you'll see some pretty big numbers as we go through all of these. And again, if this is a direction that the board understands, minimizes flood risk, but it also comes with a very huge price tag, and it's not what the board wishes that we pursue. There are other ways of, essentially responding to emergencies that could be considered. So,
Brad, this is Marge. Is there any way that we could probably get state money or city money or county money to, if we wanted to pursue this, to help with this?
that's a question Matt has most experience with. Matt, you want to jump in now?
Sure. Yeah, we've been having that conversation amongst our team, knowing that the magnitude of the options we're presenting here are beyond what the district can fund in regular cycles on its own. So that would be one of our recommendations, is that if you were to go down the road of detailed design and continuing to advance some of these options, you would find a funding partner, most likely starting at the doorstep of the Minnesota DNR, looking for a potential 75% DNR cost share type of arrangement, where you would be bringing in outside dollars to fund some of these projects. Now that is a key thing to consider as you look at these. As you begin to partner with outside entities, they'll have their priorities about how they divvy out money and how the projects get formulated so they achieve their goals of what their grant programs are. So you begin to look a lot at the benefits and the costs and how many homes and businesses are protected versus what we're investing. And that becomes a dialogue and an application process with somebody like the DNR.
If I could interject.
So to get, I'm sorry, but it's, again, to get to the point where we can ask someone else to partner with us, we have to do what?
You would have to have a project formulated as this study will give you, and you'll have to, and you would have to begin the process of getting on there. You would meet with them for some dialogue to understand funding availability, the funding cycles, and how that relates to bonding bills of the past and forthcoming bonding bills, and see what's available. And then begin with Pat Lynch at the DNR, who runs the DNR's funding program for flood hazard mitigation, and show them the project, show them what we're looking at, and begin laying out why this project's beneficial to the district, why it's needed, and what the historical impacts of flooding in this area have been. So what is they would want to have a dialogue about what's the benefit to the public for the dollars invested. And a study like this would get you off the ground on that conversation. The DNR doesn't fund studies at this stage or prior. They can potentially look at detailed design as well as construction projects as candidates for their funding.
Okay, to even start a dialogue, we have to have the project outlined. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah.
Roughly outlined, you would want to know what are the big, what's the big leverage you're trying to pursue in the project? Is it buyouts and structural measures? Or is it just buyouts, or is it just structural measures? You'd want to begin to frame up what kind of scope of work you think the district would want to pursue.
Okay,
Knowing that in detailed design, you're going to refine that and optimize that and keep digging into what's the best option and the best investment and the project with the most cons and the least, or the most pros and the least cons.
Marge, could I interject?
please.
Last year I brought up this issue when we talked about a resolution to MAUD. MAUD always puts out a flood hazard mitigation proposal to the legislature and advocates for it, lobbies for it. What I brought up last year was starting to discuss the issue that urban areas, because of the new Atlas 14 data, urban areas are now going to be faced with dramatic infrastructure issues and huge projects related to flood mitigation, and that we ought to be lobbying for an element that's for urban areas. And I think, well, it's going to be a long-term issue, but I think we need to really pursue that because we're not the only district that's faced with issues like this. There's going to be other districts that have major roadway and piping and storage issues just like this. So I think we ought to devote some more attention to that issue and start talking to more of the MAUD and other people or legislators, whatever, that this is coming down the pike and we're going to need some state assistance to move forward on some of these issues.
I would like to tell you that I think you're right again, Cliff. I agree with
Thank
you. I just wanted in my mind to clarify what our first step was here with this project, what we had to do to be able to talk to somebody else.
Yeah.
And there are additional funding options available. We're suggesting you start with the DNR because it's more local and it's a little bit more flexible as to what you have to demonstrate and how you get prioritized for dollars. When you go up to the federal level, the processes and the cost benefit analyses required to justify projects, it's more detailed and it takes on another dimension above what DNR would be looking at.
Yeah.
Okay, gentlemen, are we going to get to that first step?
A good question.
Let's move forward.
Yeah, you can go
Okay.
say-
Okay. Yeah, good dialogue, good discussion. And I'll just as a quick aside, when you come back to the story map, on the link, there is a live or a PDF here of MDNR funding option. It'll be a good, give some good background and as well as some representative examples regarding, funded projects. Okay, getting back into Owasso Basin, this big green area, this is an industrial property, a subsidiary of Fratellone Companies. It's got a very big footprint that encroaches into Owasso Basin. And what this is showing is a property buyout or a land and property acquisition, and then an expansion of the Owasso Basin footprint itself. And that would be structure removal and demolition, and then dredging and excavation to expand that footprint to provide more local storage. Again,
That'd be huge.
A very large element of that scope for sure. Other pieces are more of the, if you'd want to call them low-hanging fruit, but do contribute, do provide a benefit, include a local raising or a localized raising of Ryan Road with a culvert upsizing to convey additional flow from some MnDOT storage ponds, jigs, and drywall. redevelopment or regrading of an existing berm here on the west side of Owasso Basin alongside the industrial park. And then currently there's a weir that exists here near the outlet of Owasso Basin into Jarvis Creek. This concept includes a complete removal of that weir. So it'd be taking that weir out to let the water get out faster and not have to maintain a certain elevation before discharging. Okay, so that's subproject 1A of Owasso Basin. A lot going into it, some very high dollar scope items for sure, just given the nature of them relative to constraints within their corridors. But yeah, following back on the comment of the Owasso Basin expansion, subproject 1B, if it'll load here, subproject 1B takes a look at what are the benefits of all these kind of smaller pieces of the pie and just the berm alone around North Star Estates. And you still get a very high volume reduction of impacted homes.
This is the same as 1A. We just are not, it doesn't include that Freightor part.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so it comes at a much cheaper cost.
So this plan doesn't involve moving and storing the homes.
Yep.
It still does.
Oh, it does.
Yep, that's this berm footprint here.
Okay.
It doesn't involve the buyout, it looks like, of the big property to the north.
Correct.
Okay.
And
Or the excavation of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, after the buy.
right, and Sam, a quick other thing. So I'm just thinking as you're going here, well, gosh, we should just move on all the low-hanging fruit now that you mentioned, like the clearing out the creek and the whatever that thing you said with the culvert and raising. So I'm hoping that you're going to tell us like what that would be too, the things that are quick and easy that we could move on.
Yeah, and if you look up here on the left side of the ribbon, you'll see berm grading, road raises, culverts and piping, weir removal, and Jarvis Creek modifications. These are the features being presented here. The berm grading is the biggest ticket item of this scope. The other elements are the lower hanging pieces or lower hanging fruit that can be implemented in the short term, wouldn't require extensive funds to execute.
Cam, is that you?
That's my dog. That's my dog. She barks at everything.
As you look at that list that Sam is pointing out on the left side of your screen, we wanted to make sure we captured there are in these areas major utility easements and conflicts that have to get dealt with when a project goes through. At this stage we allocate dollars and try to account for that in our budgeting. But when these projects go through these developed areas, remember that property buyout, when we use that term, you know, that's always a voluntary negotiable
Right.
thing. We have to work with them to come up with a situation and a price that's agreeable and advantageous to each landowner, and each landowner can act independently. It's not necessarily that, they have to be engaged independently. I'll just put it that way. And that can take time, and that can take a lot of conversations.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a key summary or a key takeaway from the Owasso Basin elements, either subproject 1A or 1B, both of these scopes have a very large reduction of impacted homes in the 100-year inundation footprint. They do come at a high cost given the nature of the scope elements in and around this area being as congested as it is. You also have interesting geology, to say the least, based on historical soil borings that we've looked at and reviewed. It's very sporadic as to whether you're going to find peat, silts, organics, or sands, weak and loose sands. So you don't have high strength material beneath you. So structural elements like a berm that would be creating a flood wall up against homes would have some extensive engineering going into it. And on top of a poor foundation, that includes a lot of unknowns at this stage, but also a lot would go into that to make sure that it's safe, the appropriate factors of safety are there.
Well, in our past work on the Owasso Basin, we determined, or we found that that whole North Star Mobile Home Park is placed on a fly ash pad over some pretty significant peat, right, Brad? I think we had
Yeah,
some
there's
borings of like 40 feet of peat in some
30
of
to
those
40
areas.
feet of peat
Yeah.
in the area. And they use fly ash to stabilize back when there weren't regulations on that, to stabilize that pad where the mobile homes are, or the manufactured homes are.
Putting that much
parked.
weight,
Yeah.
putting that much weight on top of the old fly ash pad, would that be an issue? I would think.
But it will be, and we have ways of engineering that and
Okay.
taking a basically staged longer period to compress the peat, so it gets to a point where it compresses it to a point where it can support it. But yeah, it's not straightforward, and it wouldn't be a quick construction or design process.
You can explain the modifications to Jarvis Creek next?
Yes, we can.
I'm curious on that. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point. So as we go through these individual story map tabs, the Jarvis Creek elements are they're going to show up on every one.
Yeah.
So yeah, walking through those, this green dashed line that you see is representing dredging along its entire length. We did a series of cross-section shots as part of some field survey this previous period, and we analyzed those, and we did find that there are high points along the creek where the creek is either silted and sediments accumulating. So that should get cleaned out to just optimize the conveyance capacity and get the water moving through as fast and as efficiently as possible. Also, model results are showing that with the precipitation updates, existing infrastructure in terms of culverts, both under I-35 and then Centerville Road and these other crossings, are undersized for these rain events. And especially if you are modifying upstream infrastructure to get water moving through the system faster, those need to be upsized. And so underneath I-35, Centerville Road, these road crossings are essentially, well, not for I-35, but for these local roads are reconstructs. That includes, removing or abandoning the existing one, that pipe that's there, or constructing a new one of bigger size or multiple pipes of larger size adjacent to it. I-35, we will not be doing a reconstruct of that.
Yeah.
Well, we would be pipe jacking underneath that corridor to install a pipe.
Double 84-inch culvert, right?
Yeah, depending on the sub-project, yep.
Did you look at, rather than just to clean out, some type of way of making that channel more efficient, like piping it or a concrete channel or some of those kinds of options?
In discussions with Brandon and Lulu Fang, another engineer from BAR, who were heavily involved with the resiliency study, my understanding is that concept was evaluated.
Okay.
I don't know the basis for why it was taken off as a viable option. For this study, though, we did not look at doing any sort of permanent lining along it.
We do have an option that you'll see in a bit about supplementing the open channel flow with a pipe next to that creek.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Moving on into subproject 2 is the bypass pipeline. And this is where I get real excited.
You get really excited?
I get really excited. Sliding the bar over, you can see the benefit of a pipeline. So in and of itself, you don't take as many of the homes out of the 100-foot or the 100-year inundation footprint as the infrastructure for Owasso Basin. You do have still a very high reduction of impacted homes. And a key takeaway is this is looking at just just a bypass pipeline in and of itself. It does not include, local infrastructure projects to, protect these 8 homes here at this corner. or the,
Road raising.
yep. It's just strictly looking at the magnitude of impact of the pipeline in and of itself. This pipeline from the east side of Owasso Basin here during the 100-year storm event, you see roughly 200 CFS of peak flow moving from the MnDOT system, Twin Lake, this area over here and upstream, through the Larry Pond pipes into Porky Pond and subsequently into Owasso Basin. That's a very high peak rate. That's 90,000 gallons per minute.
So comparatively, what is the cost ratio on that?
So you'll see some summary figures near the end of this. That'll help compare them side by side.
Oh, great.
Yep. So we'll get into the cost benefit, capital cost per property protected ratios. So you'll see a concise summry that'll help you grasp that a little better.
You folks are just awesome.
Did you look at doing this bypass pipeline along with the low-hanging fruit items that you identified in the earlier option?
For what you see on the screen, Diane, no, not in this specific instance, but from an overall perspective, yes. And we didn't look at optimizing configurations at this stage. It was more of, okay, we see that you have, 12 homes or businesses still impacted. And those can...
Our detailed design intent would be, for example, if you went with this as a baseline, our detailed design intent would be to look across the range of the sub-projects and yes, look to see if we could suggest some smaller parts of those other ones to mitigate those remaining issues. This sub-project has about a 1 foot higher 100-year flood stage in that Owasso Basin than the previous examples, which is why those red homes are appearing in this one and not the previous.
Mm-hmm.
I have a quick question too. I'm assuming that with all of these, you took into consideration what the impact would be downstream. And then overall, I really want us to keep in mind if we're increasing water into the river, that we're going to be impacting our downstream neighbors too. So we want to try to avoid that whenever we can, of course.
Mm-hmm. So we're not necessarily increasing the volume of flow downstream. We're just getting it from point A to point B a little faster. It does come with impacts in terms of local infrastructure on the primary conveyance route, but Aaron, maybe you know a little more about the impact to Lake Jarvis, but my understanding is it doesn't have an appreciable impact to the lake level in Lake Jarvis?
It does not, Sam, and the project that was approved just before this presentation helps it will mitigate that. So
Yeah.
These projects are used in conjunction with the project that you just approved to go out for bid, so there would be no rise in the system downstream.
Yeah, you'd need that other operation plan to mitigate the effects of the additional flow rate coming down from this.
So one question about the improvements to the Phelan outlet in the Keller Channel that didn't dawn on me earlier. We're running more water through, but we're getting out faster. But the Beltline interceptor runs under pressurized conditions under extreme storm events. So we're running more water into it. Is this a timing of flow issue so that the St. Paul water is out before this water gets there?
It is a timing issue, and we would have to look at that as a part of the operations plan on just exactly how to time it. But yes, it's a timing issue.
Okay.
Right.
So we're not exacerbating
No,
the downstream Beltline problem.
that's right.
Okay.
I have one question. If we improve Jarvis Creek to get the water out of there faster, do you look at during the event the water would come up, it might come into the North Star states, but go down so much faster that their inundation would be reduced to a place where they could deal with it?
What, Larry? I don't understand.
Well, if you're moving water out of there faster, part of what happens in a flood like this is you have the big rain, the water comes up, it comes into North Star Estates, but your goal is to get it out of there as fast as you can. So if we make the investments to get the water out of there as fast as we can, then do we mitigate the effects, even though they're still there? I mean, those houses, those structures are, we talked about this before. They're raised, but people put things under them. I get that.
Yeah.
But if we're looking at 5-6 years to get funding for this, are we better off to try to figure out in the short term how to get the water out of there as fast as we can, so that we reduce the amount of pain these people feel if it does flood?
I think there probably, conceptually, there probably is benefit to that, and we could show, you know, to what degree that would be through modeling. So I think I understand where you're headed, Larry. If we're waiting for funding for 5 years, let's at least improve the system downstream, because that seems a bit more affordable and something that we could bite off as a district in anticipation of that. And we are helping things along the way and building towards a bigger project. Is that kind of where you're headed?
Yeah, and I would conceptually think of having an emergency plan like we have a lot of things that says, oh, look, we're having this event. People in North Star Estates, here's what you have to do. The water's going to come up, but our modeling shows that if we hadn't done anything, the water would come up and it'd be up for a week and a half.
Yeah.
As we increase the efficiency of getting it out of here, you're going to be up for a day, but then it's going to go back down again.
Yeah.
That's what I'm looking at, is mitigating the issues.
And I don't think, just to piggyback on, I don't think that we have information right now for tonight about what, you know, what the red homes would look like if you only did that Jarvis outlet, but that's certainly something that we could look at, is picking that one piece out if the district wanted to look at that piece in particular.
Because at some level, at least the experiences we seem to be having in the world today, how hard you try, something's going to flood someplace. But if you have a reasonable way of getting the water out of there, that's what's really key sometimes, rather than actually preventing the flooding. So
I think that's a really good
we got to look at that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I did talk to Brandon about that in the first phases when we looked at this. You know, and what he had expressed to me was it will help the drainage. And like you said, there might be improvements in timing and just ability for the water to get out, but it won't take the homes out of the flood risk.
Right.
It would just make it, the situation maybe a little better. So.
And I get that. I get that. And but again, you know, knowing what budgets are and what they're particularly going to be in the future, and looking at even the bonding that in the MOD conference we had last week or week before, whenever it was, I think they were looking at a total of $20 million for flood control.
Yeah.
We're talking about projects that would take all of that, which is kind of likely.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
I think, has there been any discussions directly with North Star Mobile Home Park yet?
No,
No.
not to my knowledge.
I'm looking at this diagram here now and showing the corner, you know, those dozen or so up in the corner. There may be, I mean, they may know of options that could be pursued to just basically lift the home, not necessarily berm it. Maybe if we, you know, raise the roadway and lifted a few homes, it'd be a lot less of a magnitude of project. It might be doable, but that we can talk about that later when we get to phasing.
Yep, all good discussion points, and it just shows us that you guys are thinking the right things. We like to see that. So the pipeline itself would have an outlet at Porky Pond. It would come down, generally follow Country Drive in the I-35E corridor, and make a 1,500 foot to 2,000 foot radius to pass under I-35 and discharge downstream of I-35E. So this tunnel, many of you were in Beltline when we facilitated a tour during that active construction project. This isn't as big as Mainline that we went in. It's 7 feet, which is, there are elements of the Beltline interceptor that are that size. And then constructability, we looked at how would we put that pipe in from point A to point B. Looking at existing topography, this is a very large hill here. And at the midpoint of this pipeline, to have a gravity drain pipe, you have close to 50 feet of cover.
Wow.
That's a lot. You have a tight corridor, you'd be looking open cut. The takeaway is unfeasible. So we'd be looking at utilizing a trenchless excavation method.
Mm-hmm.
In this specific instance, it would be a micro tunnel boring machine or an MTBM. The only difference between a micro TBM and a TBM is that it's remotely operated. You don't have anybody in the pipe at the cutter head itself as the excavation is occurring. That TBM would be, you would TBM this from the downstream point working uphill, daylighting at the upstream end, and it would be installing the pipe right behind it as it goes up. So by the time your cutter head goes in here and comes out upstream, you have a complete pipe behind you. Implementation, it's incredible technology. Yeah, it's great.
Sam, I've got kind of a basic question. Is that water that would have gone into the basin, or is that diverting it somewhere else? And do you still keep the outlet and take out the weir on the southwest corner so they work together?
Good questions, Dan. This is capturing runoff before it gets into Owasso Basin. In this specific scenario, it's not accounting for those other localized elements of Owasso Basin, the weir removal, a pipe, raising the road. Those are pieces that would be included in a detailed design element on creating the best synergy between the direction the managers would like to take. But for this specific instance, no, it's not accounted for. Will it have an impact to these red buildings? Very likely, in a positive way.
Yeah.
Further, providing more benefit.
Yeah.
But with the TBMs and trenchless technology, it's a specialized piece of equipment. A lot of those TBM cutter heads are custom built for that specific tunnel and those specific site conditions. And it's a specialized contractor performing the work. So they are not cheap either, unfortunately. And realizing that, we recognize that there's a lot of merit to having a pipeline to bypass that peak rate of 200 CFS. Cut and cover down this alignment, not feasible. But we looked at, what's another alternative to getting in a pipe, to rerouting that flow. So Subproject 2B takes a look at a pipeline concept, but a separate alignment. And the focus of this alignment is utilizing the existing creek corridor and burying a pipe in close proximity or adjacent to that creek bottom. So you effectively go from one extreme of extreme depth to essentially no depth. And you save a lot of cost in terms of installing the pipe itself.
Sam,
Well,
Sam, what kind of
this
pipe
looks
diameter?
so practical compared to the other one.
Yes, but at the same time, this
But-
area is very flat.
Yeah.
You have, it's 6,000 feet long. You've got like, I don't want to misspeak, but it's like 5 feet of drop over that period.
Well, then.
It's very, very flat. And so getting a pipe from here to make your inverts and hydraulics to work, we can't put in as big a pipe as this guy because we don't have the cover
Okay.
and along the corridor. And second, we have to put in multiple pipes to make this feasible, because with a shallow cover, you're restricted to using an arch pipe. We've got a 3 foot, 36 inch tall rise, 58.5 inch span arch pipe. 3 of them coming from Porky Pond, following the alignment here, connecting with the junction box, transitioning to 2 arch pipes. And the intent of going from 3 to 2 is that we would have an outlet in that junction box, which would route excess flow during that peak event into the creek itself, with the focus of getting that discharge to a downstream point of Jarvis Creek.
So the pipes are a good idea, but they don't seem very practical.
Great idea.
Well,
Yeah.
It doesn't save a lot of money. really.
Yeah, doesn't save a lot of money because you are dealing with 3 pipe runs that's 2,000 feet long. So you essentially have 6,000 feet of pipe here in this 2,000 foot range. And then from point A to point B down here right before I-35E, you have 2 2,800 foot long pipe segments. So that's another 5,600 feet of pipe. So for length of pipeline installed, it gets quite high. A drawback of using arch pipe is the inability of jacking that underneath I-35E to get that flow to daylight downstream of this crossing. You would have to construct new 2 84-inch circular pipes beneath I-35E, and those pipes come at a price tag of around $4 million to do both of those. You're looking at 1,200 total feet of pipe. So
Wow.
a big piece of
So that would be $8 million?
No, sorry. It's 4 million for both segments of pipe. It's 1,200 feet total, 2 600-foot reaches.
Well, 4 million is still a lot of change.
Yeah.
Yep. And that, it just contributes that it just shows how terrible our topography is to work with. And then someone built a highway along our corridor that we have to go through.
Well, quite frankly, how much would it cost us to buy out the trailer house village or those homes?
Yep, and we'll be getting into that in more detail too, because that, from an economical standpoint, on paper does have a lot of merit as a viable option for addressing this flood. Okay, and again, on the left, as you come back and have time to look at it, you'll see different risks associated with the sub-projects, the cost range and benefits and so forth.
How about if we just take out a gigantic insurance policy, flood insurance on the park?
Mm-hmm.
Sam, I want to just point out too that with this pipe option, that there is an increase in the number of homes that do not come out of the flood risk zone, as compared to the other bypass pipeline as well.
Correct, Tina. Yeah, it's a good observation. Given that it is a smaller pipe without the hydraulic capacity of the one going along I-35E and the longer distance it has to go through, it's unable to get as much flow as quickly, I guess, as the bigger one. And you see that by additional structures remaining in the flood plain. Okay, so those are the 2 big infrastructure pieces of addressing this. Subprojects 1 and subproject 2, further broken down into the A and B. Looking at how we would combine these, we wanted to provide a visual of what Owasso Basin infrastructure would do in addition to the bypass pipeline. This is what it looks like on the screen. We analyzed it. We have additional details on this in one of our summary tables here at the end. But just to help, there were a lot of comments on, well, what about the weir? Well, what about Raising Ryan Road? This will be an effective story map link to help you visualize what could be combined and how, both for Owasso Basin and the I-35E bypass pipeline, as well as Owasso Basin and the Jarvis Creek alignment pipeline.
Our intent with showing you those, like Sam said, was to get us thinking about what's complementary in these different with these different options, but we wouldn't necessarily propose doing all of everything shown there to the greatest extent possible. You'd have to optimize it.
Yep.
Meaning we have to optimize it, meaning what?
Meaning us during detailed design. So it could imply that you don't need this berm and you'd still have the same benefit with the pipeline going in and these other local infrastructure pieces, or you do the Owasso Basin scope, but maybe you just need one straight pipeline down. And that's kind of what the optimizing would be, running different model scenarios, different design concepts, further integrating these alternatives.
I have a quick comment and question too. So I'm understanding that you're presenting us with these options and we have the ability to pick and choose from any of the options to put together the best plan possible, which I think is great. And so we could, I imagine, later say, all right, let's pick these 6 options and show us what happens there. And then I also just want to pipe in again about habitat and ecosystem. I think that it's important for us to, when in the end of the day, consider that as well. How do these projects impact the habitat and ecosystem? And maybe have, since we have Bill on board, you know, commenting on, you know, certainly like the idea of buying up the Fratelloni land and increasing the basin and increasing storage in the watershed district has multiple additional benefits to the ecosystem and habitat, as well as to increasing our watershed district storage that might be really expensive, but we want to consider that too. And so I just encourage us to have that component added when we get down the road.
That's a very good point, Pam. And in fact, there is a separate study that's ongoing, sort of looking at water quality aspects and kind of piggybacking off the different concepts, not included in this study scope, but a separate study. But that is tracking on the side as well from a water quality standpoint. Okay, so we've marched through the different sub-projects. Hopefully everyone has a better understanding or is able to conceptualize what that means, what it would take, what sort of commitment each of the sub-projects would involve. If I go back to the landing page here and I go to our sub-project summary matrix, this looks really busy, and it is really busy. Over here on the left, just to give you an outline of what this table is providing, you have your conceptual project ID, subproject 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B. We've covered those in depth now, walking through the story maps. The new ones on here are subproject 3, Jarvis Creek, which includes clean out and dredging and modified road crossings. This would be a piece of each of these subprojects above it. Because each of these sub-projects are relying on Jarvis Creek to help convey that water faster. And so it's not like it's not impacting structures at risk, or we didn't analyze it as structures at risk. It is included in the modeling of each of these because it's just a critical piece of the system. So that's on there. Subproject 4 is the land and property acquisition concept. And then you have 2 rows here that just look at different ways to combine Owasso Basin and the pipelines. And just to give you some background on, if you did everything, the full scope of Owasso Basin and the bypass, this is what you're looking at. Is that a real number? No, it's not. You would optimize and there'd be redundancy. You'd be able to take a lot of the elements out. But it just gets you thinking of, yes, that's a much bigger number than just the pipeline alone. And then at the bottom here, a lift station alternative. The 200 CFS is a big number, 90,000 GPM. Could you pump that? Yeah, you could pump it. You're pumping it a long distance. It's going to get very expensive very fast. It's a massive lift station. And you have very high annual operating costs in terms of power consumption, maintenance, electrical. It's included just to give you an idea. It's not a, I'll leave it at that. Looking at primary benefit, 95 to 102, that's the range of properties removed from the 100-year water surface elevation. That's the number you'll look at to get an understanding of the benefit, to the direct benefit of properties removed. That number is provided there. Secondary benefits, in terms of resiliency and flexibility toward future water management, the pipelines would provide the best score on that front. Given that you have a big massive pipe there that is open for drainage, and considering that, you know, you could put in a pipeline and then maybe you look at installing a smaller lift station to pump water out of the Owasso Basin into that pipe. And maybe that's a viable option, and that's something that could be looked at, but it gives you further flexibility and resiliency. Benefits of Owasso Basin, you're increasing the attenuation of Jarvis Creek, you know, promoting local storage. which is a great benefit to manage it locally. And then elements of Owasso Basin are easy to implement in the short term, like removing the weir, localized raise on Ryan Road and so forth. In terms of risks, the most risks are associated with the Owasso Basin, just given that you have some major utility conflicts along that corridor. You have the poor ground conditions specific to that area, the risk of a berm overtopping or failing if you construct one. You've got a community or an area at risk in that regard. And other things to note. Each subproject comes with a multitude of permits that need to be navigated and received. Pretty extended timelines in terms of implementation tied to the funding piece. And then capital cost range, very expensive numbers. These next two columns provide an overview of, you could spend $25 million to implement subproject 1A and protect almost all the properties. What's the value of that? The value of those properties, we looked at them, if you spend $25 million to implement subproject 1A, the cost of buying those out is right around that, that's the value of properties protected. Unresolved impact. So the projects themselves don't protect every single property within the 100-year inundation footprint. So this unresolved impact to properties is kind of giving a representation of, you spend this much money, you protect this value of homes, but there's still this 1.3 million remaining that needs to be addressed or is not protected. And then a cost benefit ratio, you have a capital cost for the project, you have a number of homes protected. So you take that capital cost, divide it by the homes protected. This is your rate per property being not necessarily protected, but removed from the inundation footprint. So subproject 1A, 285 per property, 1B, 200K per property, bypass pipeline along I-35E, 350,000 per property. Bypass pipeline along the creek alignment, 321 per property, and so forth. And then property acquisition with a price tag of 25 to 30 million, sitting around 26.5, with a cost of about $250,000 per property on average. There are a lot of commercial properties within that 100-year inundation footprint that are driving up a buyout value. Obviously, the cost of purchasing a business is much higher than purchasing a home.
That, Sam, in the sub-projects, we provide them that breakdown of, if there's an unresolved issue at properties in that gray area there, we show you what the industrial commercial breakdown is compared to residential remaining in the floodplain.
Mm-hmm.
And quick question, if we were to buy out the homes, that would also create a huge opportunity, correct me if I'm wrong, to increase the basin and increase storage and improve habitat. Is that right?
That would be correct. Yeah, you'd have a lot of options to utilize that land if it was district owned, for sure.
If we bought them out, we'd own that whole square.
Yes.
Correct? And what could you do with that?
Depends if you want to get into that fly ash cap or not.
Well, just a question. Could you make it into a park? Could you make it into, assorted holding ponds on the property? What could you do with it? And again, not detail, but just an idea.
Mm-hmm.
That is something that we would want to talk with the City of Little Canada about, and obviously the landowner at some point, but the City of Little Canada has comp plans for this area, and we'd want to have that discussion with them to see what their vision is for this area in the future.
The mobile home park qualifies as their low-income housing allotment, so
yeah,
That's right.
They would be reluctant to give that up.
Yeah. But also, it's just a point of clarification, Sam and Matt. The costs that we're showing in terms of the buyouts, those are just to buy out the affected properties and not the entire park.
Yeah.
We don't have a number that's the cost for the entire park. I just wanted to clarify that.
Correct.
Yeah, that's a good
Okay.
point. Yep, it's just the structures in red.
And when you have that, when you're thinking about that in your mind too, remember, if you are talking about tens of millions to buy out a large segment of the community like that, the DNR would weigh that differently than if you're protecting that same part of the community.
Yeah,
It was just a thought.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's fine.
You know, how feasible, I don't know, but
Right.
apparently not very.
Well, it'd be interesting to talk to North Star Mobile Home Park owners just about, you know, what they feel about it. I mean, if they're aware that regular flooding might be a possibility, how viable do they think the park is anymore? You know, that
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't hurt to have some conversation at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think as part of the work this year in, you know, we do have a budget item for emergency response plans for affected areas of the district. And that's one thing that we would be getting into is more direct conversations with the property owner, which is unfortunately a very large national company, one of the bigger ones, which always makes things difficult. But we would be getting into more discussions and more pointed look at individual, the individual manufactured homes throughout the property. So that,
Well, isn't that kind of a good place to start though, just to start a conversation with somebody
Yes.
there?
oh
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. Yeah. And so that's what I'm saying. We would be digging into that anyway as a part of an emergency response plan. So getting conversations started is definitely on the short list of things to do.
You know, I just want to insert that each one of those lots represents a lease that the landlord would be obligated on. So the sooner the better on that too, because as leases come due, maybe they'd enter into month to months instead of long term. So that difficulty could maybe go away over time.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a good point too.
Yeah, I think a next step on this study in particular is to meet with the City of Little Canada and share this presentation similar to we're sharing with you, get some feedback from them, and also plan to have discussions with the mobile home park or the manufactured home park. Like Erin said, you know, emergency response planning is still on the top of our list for this area. In the meantime, especially with the long timeline for some of these projects. So we'll be needing to talk with them about that as well. So.
Mm-hmm.
Are we done now?
Not quite. I got one more treat for you.
Okay.
Zoom this up a bit here so it shows up a little better. So this final figure here is just intended to help you further visualize. Okay, you have sub-projects across the bottom. What does that, it's intended to give you a quick visualization of the cost benefit. So to explain this chart a bit, if you're doing sub-project 1A, which is the full Owasso Basin scope of the berm around North Star Estates and the expansion into the industrial property, that's coming at a price tag, you know, fast approaching $30 million. By doing this project, you are protecting 100 homes. This is that value of that 100 homes in terms of assessed values. And so you would be spending $30 million to protect $25 million worth of local infrastructure, you know, homes and businesses. There is yet 2 homes or 2 structures remaining that is not covered by the scope of that project, and the value of that is down here. So by doing close to $30 million worth of development work, you're protecting 100 homes and this much value in terms of commercial or residential real estate. And then there's yet this much remaining that would not be covered and would need some sort of localized flood protection or further look at what it would take to protect that property. Subproject 1B, you would implement close to $20 million, protect 97 homes, and you still have 5 remaining at that kind of level. So this has helped to gauge your cost benefit as you consider, you know, okay, that project has a lot of merit, but it's coming with a lot of risk. especially around Owasso Basin. So kind of weighing the economics, the risk, the political nature of it, local community, just to kind of help further guide what seems like the best path forward.
Sam, do you want to highlight Subproject 4 on there too?
Yes. On the far right here, you see Subproject 4. This is the cost of property and land acquisition based on assessed values, right above 25 million, 26, 27 million dollars. To do that, spend that much money, you're protecting all the homes and businesses. And so that can be a benchmark in terms of economics of cost and benefit relative to implementing a large scale project.
You're essentially removing them all from the floodplain by buying them out, and there's no structural features associated with that one. So that's kind of a baseline of what if you only did voluntary buyouts for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's essentially the conclusion of stepping through the different concepts and approaches and what each of the sub-projects involves and the costs. A lot of information was shotgun blast at you, so hopefully you're able to kind of take a lot of it in. I think at this point I'll kind of hand it back off to you, Matt, if you want to kind of give an overview or summary and talk about our thoughts on that.
Thanks. That was good, Sam. So as you chew on this and you think about what role the existing emergency measures, maybe some enhanced emergency action plans, how that plays into the future role of the district, as well as the non-structural buyout program that we illustrated tonight, the structural construction features we illustrated tonight. Think about what the right blend and the right level of investment is for the district, and what is the district's role in this. Our intent is to help you have that conversation and think through the options so you can have that discussion and make the decisions. If you asked us what our recommendation would be, our recommendation would be to go into, if you decided you wanted to be active in this arena to solve these problems, our recommendation would be to move into detailed design, pursuing an optimized approach, combining most likely a bypass pipe down Interstate 35, and then looking at the best opportunities to enhance that with smaller features in the Owasso Basin, while keeping potential buyout of willing landowners, and especially the lowest, hardest to protect properties on the table. With the project-wide budget, I'll call it a budget, but it's a benchmark, but the project-wide benchmark of acquiring 103 properties at a price of about $25 to $30 million. It's big, and we talked about funding partners. We would also recommend, as you continue the detailed design, you take this initial feasibility information to starting with Minnesota DNR, potential funding partners, and getting in front of them and begin the dialogue about what's available, what's not available, what the timing is, what multi-year funding projects look like for them, and begin understanding what's important to them at the moment in terms of prioritizing what projects get funded, so that you could formulate your detailed design to give it the best chance of obtaining dollars. We talked about the Jarvis Creek improvements. We would recommend selecting some of those pieces like Jarvis Creek that provide short-term benefit and are maybe easier to implement and lower on the budget scale. You could move ahead with those in the short term. There are some pieces that would lend themselves toward that. And we look at, we would want to engage the City of Little Canada and North Star Estates, like was suggested by Tina earlier, and really understand the planning constraints and the landowner constraints associated with any property that would be transferred in ownership. that's a time consuming and delicate conversation to have with homeowners and business owners, and starting that conversation earlier rather than later so you can fully understand how easy or difficult it would be a good early step as well.
Thanks,
But
Matt and Sam. I just one additional question I have I brought it up before, but it would be helpful, I think, for us to see, you know, for all of these projects that you're doing these plans on, to have a tab that says, here's the low hanging fruit. So something that we could immediately move on in our, you know, in the next year or two in our capital improvements, to just knock those off and just to sort of see, just doing these things alone, how does that impact? And then putting it all together with the whole watershed, when you put all the plans together with all the low hanging fruit.
Sure.
And
I think that's, I'm sorry, a good idea. I also think that I would like to hear what the city has to say in their plans, and even if this, and somebody has to talk to some of these other interested parties, maybe even, I don't know how the county is involved in helping with any of this, but to see what their plans are, if anything. Maybe these people just want to leave everything alone and say, well, so what?
I can say also, as we're talking about this, when you look through this document Sam has on the screen is a good reference to help think through funding. One of the examples in there is a buyout program from Clay County, Minnesota, where they purchased about 44 residential buyouts to the tune of about $10 million. So that's about $230,000 per property.
Okay.
If you remember Sam's earlier summary, we think that these project alternatives, be it buyout or structural, we're talking about something to the tune of $250,000 to $300,000+ per home. So I bring that up because that means that potentially, depending on what we'd find in detailed design, you're at about a similar benefit to cost ratio that we know the DNR has provided funding for in the past. The fact that you're looking at project alternatives that are a similar dollar value to the dollar value of what it would take to acquire all those properties and remove them from the floodplain, is the fact that those are close. It puts you in a favorable position to start that conversation about funding.
No, you're right, but I think that we haven't started a conversation with anybody yet. You know, this is our first step with you.
Yep, the first step in helping each of you get an idea of, there's a lot of homes there at risk of flooding. Here are alternatives that would help mitigate and remove those homes. This is what it would take.
If I had
And that's our job, to take a look at that.
If I had seen something where, you know, if we were developing this and we had seen something where the cost of a project was, you know, 5, 10, well, 10 or 15, 20 times what it would take to acquire the properties, that's a different conversation than if those numbers are close.
Okay.
And a project like that would not be looked at as favorably or feasible or implementable. So that can get weighed along with all the complicated, numerous competing factors you have to weigh when you make these decisions.
And as far as the low-hanging fruit pieces go, I mean, that's something right now we have a placeholder. When we talk about the budget, we can talk about that, but we have a placeholder in our flood risk reduction fund for projects that will come out of these feasibility studies. And if there's things that, you know, we want to look at from here or from the Willow Creek or some of the other studies, we can bring those forward in September too, with at least for 2021 preliminary plans for what we could pick off in those and what the benefit of doing those projects would be.
So Tina, you're saying that we will have next month a list of the so-called low-hanging fruit that we can do.
I think
in not only this area, but other areas.
Yeah, I'll ask Brad maybe to pipe in, but I think we can have a starting list and some preliminary idea of what we might want to do in 2021 or could do.
Yep.
Well, that's great. That's what we need.
Brad,
We
is
have
that-
some things in mind, and I think the reluctance to, push forward with those at tonight's meeting, first and foremost, we wanted to introduce the magnitude of the overall projects, because some of that low-hanging fruit makes sense if you're going to combine it with some of these
Right.
other larger project elements. If you're not going to do that, it may not be worth the time. So we wanted to first give you an idea of what it would take to start really having an impact in this area. And from what I'm sensing from the questions that are coming up and the interest in what you've seen here is that I'm feeling like the board does have an interest in taking this to the next level, looking at a few of those things that we could implement next year, design a bigger system so we could start pursuing that funding, doing things like that moving into 2021. Am I reading this correctly?
I'd be curious,
Well-
sorry, I'll get in here first, and I'd be curious to know what it's going to take to get it to a level where we can shop it around, I guess, for lack of a better term. If you have an idea of what kind of level of effort and financial commitment it takes to get it to that level.
I thought we were told that they had to complete the design, the project design first.
No,
No, not necessarily. Matt, do you want to clarify that?
we, so I had a conversation about this with Kent Lockismo at our office, and he spent decades with DNR. His name is actually on that Minnesota DNR funding document that Sam had on the screen. His advice to me was, since we are at feasibility and we have a sense, with your input, we would potentially have a sense for what this project formulation would be, and we have a study on the books pricing it, identifying potentially what the components are. You're best off engaging Minnesota DNR sooner rather than later to get on their radar, get on their list, and get in a position where you could potentially be reimbursed for even some of the detailed design. They don't reimburse studies like we've been doing to date, but they will potentially look at a detailed design.
Okay, so Tina, can we do that?
Yeah. I mean, that's the level of detail that we'll just need to know what that effort will take to.
And we know who to talk to over there. We know what to bring to a meeting like that to show them and ask them the questions. But that Kent's advice was, if you wanted to move forward and you wanted to know whether money's available and where you'd be positioned to potentially get some and when, to start the conversation sooner, not later. That was his advice to me.
Well, if we can't get any help from anybody, obviously we can't do the project.
Well, not necessarily.
Okay, why?
The other question is, we've got other sub-watersheds that we're talking about here too. Willow
No,
Creek
you're
and
right.
Coleman
I'm
Creek.
just saying this
And
is a
there's-
lot of money in one
There's
spot.
projects in there that we might want to move forward to, and I'm not sure what the priority might be amongst those sub-watersheds as well. So I think we need to picture all of what we need to have done here to provide protection for our community, and then decide, okay, which projects as a flood mitigation effort do we want to pitch toward DNR or whoever. But I mean, we obviously have bonding authority. We can move forward with projects that are enormously expensive and just finance it over 20 years. It's possible. I'm not saying I want to do that, but it's possible.
I have another request too, is just to help me conceptualize this. And we're talking about all these projects and all these different areas within the watershed district to combat these local flooding problems. It'd be helpful to see how they interconnect too. So if we do these projects downstream, how does that impact the upstream? If somehow we could get a sense of that down the road too, that'd be helpful for me.
And there are neighborhoods we haven't even talked about. And one is mine that just got flooded out in this last rain. You know, in the 4 blocks surrounding me, all the basements were flooded. I'm saying that there are places all over the watershed that we have to consider. I'm going along with Cliff on this.
Yeah, and that's what we do have the Willow Creek information we can share. So we do have those other areas that we're part of the Wetland Resiliency Study, Feasibility, ARMS. So we do have those other areas. So I don't know if we want to move to those, if you have capacity now, board, to continue on with the Willow Creek stuff, or how you'd like to proceed.
And I'll just say, Tina, I think, and Aaron, you can jump in here. I think Aaron's presentation is probably only like 10 minutes, maybe 15, depending on questions. So it doesn't have as much to consider as what we just saw in the Owasso area.
Does include some good news too. So
Yeah, might be a little easier to process. There's a simpler story there.
are you okay moving on to that Willow Creek area and letting this sit for a little bit?
I would like
Larry,
to.
Diane, Cliff, Pam, what do you think?
I would like to move forward.
Yeah, I'm fine with moving forward on it. We have one more study to go after this, right?
Well, Aaron said it would take 10 minutes.
Not in this meeting, but in the next meeting.
Yeah.
So we'll have the Willow Creek study to talk about tonight. We can do that. And then the Ames Lake one probably won't be for a couple of months yet, based on some conversations we've had with the city of St. Paul.
Yeah.
On those ones. So we can give you an overview of what that looks like as well.
Okay, and is it in our best interest to, like Cliff said, to wait until we have them all together and look at the portfolio?
Yeah, I mean, as
Yeah.
far as talking about prioritization and choosing projects, yeah, I think that's, I think it makes sense to kind of have that whole suite. I think there are some things we can recommend moving forward with, like for 2021, there might be some of those things that might make sense or not. Well, talk with Brad and the staff about that, team about that. Otherwise, like I said, right now we have a placeholder, we have a fund that has some dollars allocated to it. So if there are things that we determine throughout the fall and into winter, we can dedicate those funds towards those projects as well. All right, Erin, I think you
Okay.
can.
I'll try to keep this brief.
Before we start, let's try this. It's 8:45. If Aaron takes 10 minutes, we'll try and end the meeting at 9 o'clock.
Well, we have to go through the budget.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
still have budget discussion as well.
On the
9:30.
what?
We still have the budget.
The budget.
Yep.
Let's shoot for 9:30.
Who are
I'll
you?
shoot for 8 minutes. How's that? I'll try
Okay,
to-
go, Aaron.
Okay. I think I can keep this pretty efficient here. This basically, so for the Willow Creek area, you know, the first thing that we did is we went out and surveyed those low homes and businesses to confirm which ones truly were at risk and which ones weren't, and also looked at the storage in the area with survey to fine tune the topography in the model to assess how much of those structures were truly at risk versus not. So when we did that and we ran the model, we did get a different peak flood elevation, and we also did get some changes in the low entry and low home elevations. You know, when we did the Wetland feasibility study, resiliency study, we were looking at LIDAR, and as you know, when we go and really get the fine-tuned feasibility studies going, we go and we survey to confirm. So Sam, I'm going to direct you through this. If you can click on the 100-year flood hydrograph for the wetland, this wetland NB 1812, beautiful name. This is the one that's right near all those low homes in the around that cul-de-sac, and I'll have a map up shortly to remind you where those are. So you can see how the hydrograph changed a bit based on the storage assumptions that we had, and the flood elevation for the 100-year flood event dropped from 914.5 to 914.2. And that's actually really good news because that meant that there were some low buildings in the area, low structures in the area that actually came out of the flood zone because of that. So I'm going to walk you through those. Sam, if you could click on 1793 Berkeley Circle. This is one of the businesses. And actually, you know what, let's just for ease of communication and for expediency, if you could click on the updated map of impacted structures tab. I think maybe this is a faster way to say it. So all of these X's or the red dots here were places that were formerly red houses in our overview map that we were looking at earlier in this area. Anywhere where there's an orange X is an area where survey and updated modeling revealed that these homes are not actually at risk. The flood elevation is lower than we originally estimated, and the structural low entries, well, I should say, and or the low entries or low home elevations of these buildings is higher than we anticipated. So that means that anything that is orange, we're not actually worried about now. So that dropped a lot of them out of concern. The blue X's are anywhere where we're close or we're like right at maybe the corner of a building, not a low entry, but maybe at the edge of the building, where it may make sense to inform the property owners about floodproofing options. But where we're not actually too worried about water coming into the building or the business or the home. Anywhere where we have red little houses, so 1790 Orchard Lane and 3200 Orchard Court, those are properties that do still have low entries below the updated 100-year flood elevation. So those are still properties of concern. But the good news here is that we went from 12 down to 2. And also just seeing where these properties are located, it seems like we might be able to do something site specific with grading, or that we could approach this with an emergency response procedure that would protect them in the event of a flood. Also, we are looking at, going forward, looking at some storage options that would be both upstream and downstream of this area. And I'll show you what that looks like. But maybe what we can do here is, if you want to just click on, maybe I'll just show you the ones that are in blue X's or the red. So why don't we show 3255 Orchard Court, Sam? So this kind of shows what our process is. We sent surveyors out to take shots all the way around the lower portions of these sites. And anywhere that I have an elevation that's in blue means, oh, that caught our attention because it's either right at or below the 100-year flood elevation. So here we see one that's right at that flood elevation. So that's not something that I would think would justify a multi-million-dollar pipeline. Instead, it might be some site-specific floodproofing that could help that homeowner. Let's also go to, can't remember which is the other one. We'll try that one, 3215. Or actually, let's go to 1793 Berkeley Circle. Thanks. So this one is one of the businesses that's over on the south side of that wetland. And here, when we took a close look at the survey information, we see that the bottom of the dock door there is at 917.2, so well above. However, if you go to, oh, does this one scroll? Oh, I guess it's just the bottom of the building there is still slightly above the flood elevation too. So that one's not even really encroaching much on the building. So let's go to the 2 homes that are still low. So I think it was 32, let's go to 1790 Orchard Lane, right there, yep. So this is where there is concern. So we have at the southeast corner of the house, to the right side of the bottom, actually it's the small inset photo there is where that shot was taken. And when you're looking at the other photo, it's to the right side of the photo there. That's the edge of the southeast corner. But the bottom of the sliding door is at 913.6. So that's, that's 0.6 feet below the flood elevation. So that property deserves a little more evaluation to see if there's some site-specific berming or some landscaping that could be done to keep the floodwaters off of that house. And then the other one, I can't remember which the other house was, 3200. So one up there. Yep, right there. So this one also, the southwest corner of the house is shown there in the inset And then you can see the garage door there. The bottom of the garage door is at 913.4. So again, it's below that 914.2 elevation. So again, here, the next step here is to look at some site specific right around that property that could be, but also, and this is where we can move to the upstream storage potential slide. This is just upstream of this area. This is a golf course and park property, and it may be that we could hold some floodwater back on that property during the peak of the storm to drop the flood elevation in that wetland area as well. So that's something that we'll be reaching out to the city about to see if there's some upstream storage that we could be doing on that park property. And then also downstream storage potential. This is also something that we've suggested could be looked into in a little more detail for next year. So I'm going to have Sam show the big blob there in the center. That's Willow Lake. And then the wetland just to the east, the north and east side, right where his cursor is, that area could potentially have water held back there as well if we did some berming and changing of outlets. And the reason we would pursue that is not necessarily to the benefit of those upstream homes, but to take pressure off of flows coming through the Phelan chain if we thought that that was part of the overall strategy, that we could actually slow flows down upstream in this area to the benefit of downstream areas and to allow flow to come in further downstream than didn't before. And the reason we bring this up here is because the resiliency study originally looked at this element being part of mitigating increased flows coming from the wetland with the low homes around it. But that doesn't seem to be necessary given that it's just 2 homes. There's likely things that can be done at a smaller scale. And then also with the assistance of increased storage in that golf course area. The last thing that we looked at is the stage cumulative buyout cost curve. I'm going to click on that slide. This is where we were looking at the value of those properties, just like we walked you through with the Owasso bypass study. And this is just showing why we don't think that, for these 2 homes that it would necessarily be warranted to put in a pipeline under Highway 61, which is what was the concept plan from the resiliency study. The cost of doing that plus increasing the storage in the Willow Lake wetland complex area to mitigate any increased flow downstream would have been, $10+ million. And when we look at the estimated buyout cost for the 2 homes, it's $1.2 million. I'm not suggesting we would buy out those homes. I think there's things we can do to protect them in a smaller scale. So with that, I know I ripped through that pretty fast. Does anyone have any questions about that?
Oh, but thank you. That was one comment. It sure does show how important it is to go out there and do site-specific investigations, because look what happened.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
Hello.
Yeah. Any other, if there's no other questions, that's all I was really going to share on that study. I don't know who I pass the baton to now. Who's up next?
I just want to jump in with this one too. Then Erin, would you recommend that we continue the emergency response plan for those 2 homes to look at what could be done specifically for those?
Yeah, and I think in particular with these, that ends up being looking at like where a sandbag alignment could go and providing the city with some guidance on that. I think what we would also do is look at options that would involve maybe permanent, if it's not a big, huge berm in someone's backyard, but something that could be more low profile, we would think about that as we're looking at the sandbag alignments too.
Like a retaining wall of some sort?
Well, I don't know that it would be that, but maybe with some grading changes.
Oh, okay.
And then Erin or Brad, which one would like to talk about the Ames Lake area and what our plan and schedule is for that?
Yeah, I was just going to mention, and this is written up in the status report. You can, Sam, if you could just go to that area. So we're looking at the Ames Lake area again, but there's not a lot of information to share other than we have been in contact with the city of St. Paul. In many of these areas, you can see the homes in the area that's coming up on the screen now that are in the floodplain. Many of those are actually what we believe to be are more localized issues. And so we need to talk to the city of St. Paul about, the information that we've come up with through our analysis, share that with them, help them with partnering and how to maybe analyze these further. And in most cases, I believe, at least at this stage, that many of those will be improvements that they have to program into their own implementation programs. So, but our contact for the city of St. Paul said, we'd rather delay this meeting until later on this summer. We've got a lot of pressing issues during the summer. So they have asked for maybe later on in August or early September getting together to have that first initial meeting. And we believe there will be additional meetings that are going to be necessary to start to deal with these things. Some of these may be created by challenges in the Beltline, so we would look at that and help them with that analysis. And there could be capital improvements coming out of it, but I think there are other items that the city would deal with first, and this would not likely be part of anything that would be part of the 2021 budget for the watershed district. So are there any questions about this area? Again, we don't have a lot to share at this time, and we've been asked by the city to kind of delay the meeting until late summer, early fall. So
Brad, I think your approach is great. End of story.
okay.
Ed, I'm just wondering if you survey these homes like you did in the other one, if some of them would drop off too.
So that's an excellent point, and the answer is no, we haven't. And part of that is because there are so many. It's actually not just this area, but there's some other outlying areas as well. And before doing that, we'd like to meet with the city and make sure we understand what their thoughts are about the area, if they have any as-built information, and really get them involved from the get-go before we run around and collect that information. But yeah, that has not been verified on the ground yet.
Yeah, on the other hand, if the city knew that there were only 4 houses instead of a couple dozen, it might be something they'd be interested in taking care of sooner.
Mm.
Right.
Yeah, we'll definitely have that conversation with them, because that's a good first step in that process.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, Brad.
Okay.
Larry, you wanted to talk about the budget.
I do.
Talk about it.
Look, just one moment. Just want to make sure
Okay.
our staff, you're good. We're good with direction. You're feeling like we know where we're heading next before we move on.
Yeah.
Yep. Good. All right.
Okay. Well, thank you for your interest and the questions throughout all of the presentations, in particular around the Owasso area. I think that was very helpful for us to hear, and we were glad to be able to share that with you. So I think we have a good idea of what the next steps are.
Great.
Budget.
We're ready to move on to the budget.
Larry?
Right.
Is Tina going to start out with it, or do you want
Yes,
me
I am.
to discussion?
Yes, I'm just gonna share my screen. I guess I'd be interested to know if you'd like to talk off the table. Should we start with that? Oops.
Oh, I can read it.
Can you see it?
Yeah, finally.
Okay. I guess I'm not sure how it appears on your screen, but
That's smaller.
does that look good?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I've put in the packet is some usual documents for the budget. We have the budget table. I did want to make a note. I don't want to focus too much on this proposed levy increase. I mean, as far as what it's shown on the table, we can talk about what your feelings are about moving into this year with a budget increase or decrease for levy. So we can have that discussion, but this is real preliminary. There's a lot of finagling and moving around we can do and make some changes to adjust that percentage based on what the board is comfortable with. So I don't focus too much on this specifically around some of the carryover. We talk about that every year. We can refine that as we get closer to the end of the year, which can shift our levy, proposed levy projections.
Even on that, I just had a couple before you get to line item regarding the carryover. Do you have an estimated amount of the surplus that we're going to have at the end of the year? It looks like we're under budget on a number of things. And then if we are and we carry it over, does that then get added to the line item, or does that replace levy money that we would have had to levy?
So we do it a couple different ways depending on if it's general fund or CIP fund information. So general fund, the carryover goes into the general fund surplus, and that is factored into this proposed levy. So for instance, you see that there's a budget of 14.7, but we'd only be levying, you know, 7 million. So that's taking into account about $7 million in carryover between the general fund and the CIP funds. The CIP fund carryover estimates are shown here. And that is based on what I anticipate needing yet for the rest of the year and what I would anticipate having for carryover at the end of the year. But again, that can shift a little bit. So we will have, these are conservative numbers. So we could have less or more on those. The other just note is for specifically the targeted retrofit projects, I have a large grant and other, I think what do I call them? Other funds. So that's both from our Stormwater Impact Fund. So using funds from our Stormwater Impact Fund for the projects that happen to be in some watersheds where we've collected those funds from our permit projects. And you had a memo on that a few months back about kind of how we collect that fund and how we can use those for projects. So there's some dollars there. We're also looking, Paige is going to be writing a grant request for the Target store, the North St. Paul Target store. So that would be something to look at there. We also have watershed-based implementation funding coming from Bowser. It'll be a smaller amount of money, but that has to be put towards water quality projects, and that could go into that fund as well. So again, this is a real ballpark number that can change over time as well.
Tina, what about the projects we were just talking about today? Is there anything built in to start doing the, as they call it, the low-hanging fruit, or to do some sort of projects that will help these areas that have a tendency to flood? Or would that be a new allocation?
Did you see when I switched over on my screen, do you see the table? The flood risk reduction?
I do, yes.
Yeah, okay. So this just shows a breakdown. So this tab, and it was included in your packet as well, shows a breakdown of some of those project lines that have a conglomerate of projects included. And so for the flood risk reduction fund, we have some money that'll be needed to be spent in 2021 to finish up the Keller and Phelan outlet modifications. Again, this is assuming that everything gets done in 2020. We may have to adjust that as time goes on, but we do have budget now for that, but it would just affect the carryover. There's some money left for potentially the need of emergency bypass pumping for Twin Lake from West Vadnais. And that's a line item that we'll keep in there as a possibility. And then there's this 2.8 and this 1 million that's really fuzzy to be determined. And that's projects that can be born out of those feasibility studies, and that we'll have to refine as the months go on.
Now, couldn't some of the projects, like with some of the work on Jarvis Creek, come out of the CIP line item?
The maintenance and repair?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we can look at, it could be from either, actually that would be something that we would be doing under project and potentially under repair and maintenance. We probably would have to up that dollar amount, so either way we'd have to budget for it, and one of those funds we would have to plan for that.
I'd just like to say that it might
maximize it.
Oh.
Bit.
What's that, Diane?
I was just saying it'd be it seems that these flood control projects are really our priority right now. So if we can kind of leverage some of the different line items to maximize the bang for a buck, it would be good.
Yep. Yep.
I would just like to say that my attitude is that I don't really care if we have a large levy increase. We've got some critical and expensive projects coming up that I think justify, if nothing else, building up a reserve so we can respond to projects. So I'm not nervous about it. I think we should just let this move forward and see how we come out in the next couple months before we finalize it.
Cliff, again, I agree with you.
But on the other hand, at the MOD conference, everybody was talking about having their budgets cut. So if we're looking at increasing this, which I have a hard time thinking about, we better have really concrete reasons for doing that, because everybody else will be cutting budgets. They're cutting people, and you know, even if we have legitimate things, they better be well documented, because it's not going to look very good.
Well, I think if you compare metro area district versus outstate districts, you'll see quite a difference. Metro districts have the levy authority and they're all responding to issues, and I don't think they're seeing significant budget reductions. So it's definitely a metro outstate issue that you have to be careful about. And outstate has limited levy authority, and that's part of the problem. So
I agree with Larry on it. You know, another way to look at the budget would be to take a stand pat budget and then identify the things that we get by adding extra levy dollars, and you know, prioritizing them and see how many of those we want to add in. That would be the way to show our justification for it. Well, especially since we have so much surplus this year, I'm sure we can do the same.
I mean, that's always the way it's been. Our general fund budget it has to be the way it is. We're going to operate as an organization. It's the capital improvements that we always have to juggle to figure out, okay, what's the priority for the coming year, and which one do we levy for and which one do we delay? Or which projects do we put down the road and look at potential bonding for rather than levy from year to year? So that's the kind of discussion I think we have to have. But I think in terms of the general fund, that's our operations. I think we always need to discuss what we do for capital improvements, and that's a big part of the budget, really.
Yeah, for example, on the line item for the Target store, that all of a sudden is $1.4 million. Now, you mentioned, Tina, that Paige was writing a grant for that. Are we going to get help with that? And what do we get for the $1.4 million? Again, that's a lot of money compared to a lot of the other projects we have going on.
Yeah, you know, we always, as you've seen with some of the other targeted retrofit projects, we always show the cost benefit for those, and we want them to be in that range that we're comfortable with. And as you saw with the target in St. Paul, as we got into closer design, that price dropped. So this is a placeholder, and always, you know, looking at that. Before we would get into the grant writing, we would refine that cost and those cost benefits, and you can see that before that goes out. But I don't necessarily have that information unless Paige or somebody from BAR does.
But this is, I mean, that's a targeted retrofit project, is a true pure water quality improvement, and we have to stay true to our water quality improvement goals and not just look at flood management. So I will be strong on that issue.
Yeah, I think too, for that targets, the North St. Paul target, we have an opportunity. There is more opportunity on that site. So we are getting it's a large water quality project, and the benefit, I just don't have the cost per pound off the top of my head. I don't know, Erin, do you happen to remember what that cost per pound is on that project?
No, but we could sure provide that.
Yeah.
Okay, Tina, do we approve the budget or do we, what do
No,
we do here?
This is only for discussion. This is only for discussion tonight. So
Okay.
if there are items that are way off base or you don't feel like should be included, those are the kinds of things we would want to hear, or if we're missing things that you think should be included. Those are the discussion I'd like the board to have so we can come back with better numbers, better information for you.
What is the $500,000 for wetland evaluations?
So the
It's a lot
500,000,
of money.
yep. So on the budget, there was an added CIP fund for wetland restoration projects. You know, we haven't been able to have our focus workshop on wetlands, but last year and into this year, there was a concerted effort to look for restoration sites in the district, and the board still needs to have that discussion on how we prioritize what restoration looks like and what that might mean. So again, real rough placeholder for if you wanted to, as we move into the fall and winter, consider some of those restoration sites and move forward with a project. We have you know, a number of sites that were identified. We also have the project at Cottage Place that was, you know, further defined that we can talk about as well if that's a priority. But that is a real rough placeholder, I believe, unless Brad or Aaron have anything to add to that specific line item.
No, I think that's correct.
I did have a question on the project repair and maintenance breakdown. It's on page 66.
Mm-hmm.
The second line is titled Beltline 5-year inspection completion and repairs, and it's 100,000. So I would assume that's an inspection cost.
There is a repair component, and is Sam, are you still on?
Yeah, he's here.
Yep, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Why don't you explain what you got left to do and what you've seen in the first, the inspection you did?
Yeah, quick status update on that. So I think everyone's aware we didn't get the full pipe inspected this winter due to site conditions and so on and so forth. But of what we did complete, we did notice or identify some invert holes in the east mechanic branch. If you're looking at the main trunk line of the interceptor, and it has the branch that goes up toward Phelan and then the branch that goes up to the right. That branch is called East Mechanic Branch, and along that stretch, we identified a few areas with fairly in very poor condition invert holes that we feel would warrant consideration for near-term rehabilitation. The invert is a sensitive area of a tunnel. If you look at the tunnel cross section, where the stress distribution is, the invert is very critical, and having a deteriorated invert does pose structural risk.
Yeah. So this would fund some of those small improvements.
Yeah, very localized, very specific repairs. Not a robust program. A 2-week job for a contractor, if that, to mow bin, access the tunnel, do some temporary, water control around their area, and apply a repair.
Okay, thanks. I have another question on the budget narrative for the Stewardship Grant Program. It shows a reduction of $200,000. Why is that?
Yeah, so let me just go over here. So we will have some carryover. Sorry, can you still see that? Or did I stop sharing?
You stopped it.
Sorry. Yes, we do show a $200,000 reduction. So there was some larger projects, as we're looking at what next year brings, we don't have the same level of large project planning. Paige, if you're still on here, and if you need to correct me, please jump in if you can.
Okay.
but there was, there wasn't the same level. We do still have, we'll have the carryover for the Snail Lake restoration work that will move into 2021. We also are working with Twin Lake on some restoration, shoreline restoration work, so that's accounted for. But we felt like, a total of 800,000 was more accurate for this coming year.
Okay, thanks.
Tina, on the water tech position,
Yeah.
you've given us a position description, but what I would like to see is the justification for adding an extra person. What is that person going to do that we're not already doing? Why do we need an extra person? What alternatives have we looked at for adding staff? And have we looked at the fact that we're spending a whole bunch of money on water control? Is a water quality technician the right way to go? Or should we be looking at a person that is more of an engineering kind of individual to help with managing the flow that we're going to be faced with in the future?
Yeah, I can provide, if you want, next time, or I can kind of give you my summary right now. So this position is a water monitoring technician, and so I've started to remove quality from some of these titles, and I've talked with Eric about this because that team really does more than just water quality monitoring. They're doing quantity and lake levels and flow controls and a lot of different things that you're talking about. So it is more encompassing than just water quality monitoring. And so this position, so we have a full-time temporary intern that we've been able to keep year round, which is my first indication that we have enough work in this regard for a full-time staff person. And the implications of using an intern versus a full-time staff can be really difficult to train in new staff every year and have to go through that every year. We lose a lot of efficiency in that program. Also, the increase in amount of work, as you've just alluded to, we're changing how some of these systems are working. We have more moving parts and where we need more collaboration between these systems and the work that we're doing. So between that and the increase in also water quality monitoring work with special B&P monitoring and research, I feel justifies the need for that position. But like I said, it's a real clear indication when we can have somebody working full-time year-round on a temporary basis, like an intern. It shows me that they truly need that assistance in a full-time.
Well, Tina, Dave Lassen used to be in almost exclusively in that position. Now he's transferred into doing a lot of CIP construction monitoring, which is kind of what Larry was leaning toward. Yeah. So Dave's taken on a lot of that work, which has removed some of his staff capacity to help on the monitoring issues. So that created more demand on the monitoring side.
Yeah, and I do believe between adding this position and Dave's position and the other water monitoring staff, so we would have 3 water monitoring staff, and then Dave as well, along with our partnership with BAR, I believe can manage these more complicated systems that we've instituted.
Yeah, I think all the electronic monitoring and all the equipment that's in the Allen plant, that's really ticked up the technical level of the monitoring, and also a lot of routine activities that really hadn't been acquired before. I would add to the position, there's one typo error under education experience. You have written 3, but the parentheses shows 2.
Oh, yeah. And
then I would add lifting requirements under special requirements, because that position involves a lot of back activity. And then it's another opportunity to talk about whether or not you've thought about efforts to recruit minority applicants.
Yeah.
And we figured out how to, or do we want to give any preference to a minority applicant over other applicants?
Yeah, I actually have call with Mark Donay at Capital Region, because they have instituted some different hiring practices for equity initiatives. So I will be collecting some of that information
Good.
over the next coming months.
Thanks. So
Are
you're
we
gonna
done
just,
with the budget?
I was just gonna ask Tina, are you gonna distribute this to the, to some of our partners and get feedback before the September meeting where we have to approve the preliminary budget?
Yes, I always send it during the month of August to all of our city representatives as well as our counties. So I will be sending that off to them and a few of our state agency partners as well.
Okay.
I guess I would like maybe a little more discussion around the, what to shoot for as far as the levy. I've heard some discussion on justification, and I think that's justified to need that justification. But is there a certain percentage, or is there a place where you feel comfortable as a board? I've kind of heard both things. I've heard kind of keeping it stable, but allowing that justification to bring it up. Or I've also heard that 6-ish% or less or whatever is a good place to start at for now.
Well, my opinion is that we always have to increase a little bit just to account for cost of living and salary increases and benefit costs. But I think we should assume that there's going to be some additional capital improvement costs that we have to allow for. And I think I wouldn't personally object to 6%. I think it could be less if we decide to phase some of these things, but I wouldn't be alarmed at that personally.
I still would like to see 0 and then what I get for the extra 6% laid out.
I don't think we've ever had 0 in the history of the district.
No, but I understand that there's a cost of living, but salaries is not the biggest part of our budget, and we always have a lot of surplus. So the fact that we never had it doesn't mean we wouldn't be able to do the same amount of work for it.
Yes.
I agree with Cliff that I would go with 6%.
I think that there's some information I can bring forward to show, what was added in here specifically in the capital improvements that brings it up to that 6%. I think I can, easily pull those out and provide some more justification for those.
What do we get for that increased cost? I think that's good.
Yep. You might notice that for the budget, actually our general fund is decreased, but our capital improvement budget is increased quite largely.
Yep. Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to note about that is there's still this line item, the Volume Reduction Opportunity Fund, and that has $1.6 million or will at the end of the year. And that could be used for something like the targeted retrofit projects, and which would, nearly zero out that line. So that would make a significant change in our budget as well. So there are places. And like you said, Diane, with the surplus too, I mean, I estimate a certain amount right now, but as we move on, that changes. So,
what are you hearing about getting property taxes? What I read in the papers and talking to people is that there are going to be a lot of people not paying their property tax.
yeah, that's actually that's not being seen. So most people have the escrow accounts built in for a majority of our dollars come in through escrow. So what the counties are telling us is not to expect much more delinquency than before. So we always had about 2% delinquency, but they're saying maybe it would go up 0.8% from that. So there really isn't a big significant change because of that at this point. We've already received, half of for this year, half of our tax, and that there was about 98% that came in. So.
All right, where are we?
Yes, if there's any other glaring things that are concerning, I would be happy to talk more about that. Otherwise, next time in September, we will have a public hearing for this budget. So I will have a proposed budget for you to react to in a preliminary levy scenario. So this is, I'll present the budget, we'll have discussion, make any changes that you might see fit. And then you would approve a preliminary levy to be certified through the county. And so that would happen at the September meeting. Tracy, any concerns about holding a public hearing over Zoom?
I don't have any concerns. They've done a lot of special legislation, but I will look at it just to make sure. I'm thinking that they really have addressed some of these issues because of really what people are experiencing. So, but I'll confirm it and we'll publish it accordingly once we confirm that it's okay.
Okay. And just so you're aware too, when they publish this in the paper, they do put in numbers. So I'll take some of the discussion tonight, and again, they're chunks of numbers that go for both levy for general fund and CIP funds. So just so you know, I do pull those numbers from this table and that information, but that is just to give the public a sense of what we'll be talking about in September.
And they're really general categories, so there's flexibility there.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on.
Yeah.
Action items, presentations and action items. We've got,
Well, we've got project
Pardon me?
program status reports.
Yeah, we're down to the project and program status report.
I propose that we do a special meeting and talk about all these projects. And that would be, rather than a presentation, we go through all of them at some point in time.
A special meeting or just at a board meeting?
At a board meeting. Thank you, Tina.
Yeah, everything, the updates are written. If there's any questions
Yeah.
about any of them, happy to take any questions.
Yeah,
No, the only one I want to talk about, and I don't want to do it now because it's just, we're run out of time, but Hillcrest Golf Course, because I think we've got a real opportunity there.
Yeah, that's, we'll continue to have that one on our radar. As it's mentioned in the status report, the city's kind of put it on hiatus through some of the COVID stuff. So as that gets up again, we'll be on it. I think Larry had a question.
yeah, just out of curiosity's sake, what did we run into with the Boys and Girls Clubs?
What did we run into?
Yeah, it says there were issues.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it sounded pretty exciting and there were no details.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Okay.
just talk louder.
Maybe, okay. Or Dave can jump in too.
Yeah, hold it closer. That works.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so there was just some getting some permit things done, working with the city of St. Paul, getting materials in. There were some just minor delays. It's started now, it's going. Now we're waiting on the asphalt company, which is apparently a little bit delayed. They're backed up this year too. So it's pretty much, it's at a good point. There's just maybe a few more days of work left once we get that asphalt company in.
Okay, any other questions on the projects? Report of managers, anybody? Cliff?
Nothing for me.
Pam?
I liked Bill's pictures updating us on the restoration projects. I just wanted to comment. It's good.
Oh, they were gorgeous. Those gardens are beautiful.
Yeah.
I would move we adjourn.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I'll make one comment before we adjourn. I did get notice just now. I'm seeing an email from a resident that wasn't able to get on the meeting tonight due to that link not working. So I apologize for that, and I will tell her that we'll post the meeting video to the website as well as a link to the presentation so that they can follow along, and I'll send personal messages to to those residents as well, so that they understand that they can do that. So the link in the board packet worked, but the link on the website itself did not. So
I found that the square join meeting didn't work, but the full link down below did.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, it doesn't look like they were able to navigate that well. So I'll just make sure that that meeting video is posted for their viewing, and they can provide any comments they have after.
Do we have the previous Zoom meetings available too? Can we get?
Yeah, we haven't been posting them to the website. We make them available if people have questions, but we could post them if you'd like me to.
I would personally like to see them again. Yes. Well, there's details sometimes, like the presentations today.
Yeah.
I can go and look at the website myself, but I'd like to go back and hear exactly what was said. And in the past few meetings, we've had a number of presentations like that. But you just don't, you know, there's a detail that you may want to look at.
Yes, we can get those videos posted.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Diane?
Now wait.
Okay.
Well.
And
Hey, then I move we adjourn.
I'll second.
all right, we're adjourned, kids.
Good seeing everybody again, even though it's just on video.
Have a good month.
Hope you're doing
Matt
all
and
right.
Sam wanted
Sam
us to
said
say
goodbye
goodbye.
too. He dropped off.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
Matt
Thanks
too.
to them. Yep. Bye,
Bye,
guys.
everybody.
Bye.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, to get rid of this.